All right. Good morning, everybody. We're going to talk about airspace today. Chapter 15 of the PHAC, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. Who here has read that chapter, or who here has some knowledge of airspace, studied airspace? This isn't totally alien to you. Okay, who here is it alien to? I know it'd be alien to Owen. Alien. What is your name? Nathan. Owen and Nathan to be. Trevin. Airspace. You know anything about airspace yet? All right. So alien to you guys. All right. So I'll, if at any point in time I say stuff that you don't, hey, that don't make sense, stop me. All right. You need to stop me and ask questions. The difference between this class and an online class is you can ask me questions. All right. And I encourage you to do that. Okay. So airspace is a perceived as a very complicated thing. It's really not very complicated. It really isn't that complicated, okay? So I'm going to try and break it down for you in such a manner that you can remember it and remember it. I know how to use it, all right? I don't know how else to say it. The way that the FAA lays it out, or when you look at it in Part 71 of the regs, or if you look at it in Chapter 3 of the Airman's Information Manual, or you look at it in this book, in the PHAC, when it lays out, you know, the different classifications of airspace and visibilities and cloud distance requirements and their heights and vertical limits and lateral limits, it can be confusing if you're just looking at a chart and trying to memorize all this stuff. So I'm going to try and make it a little bit easier for you, okay? So I encourage you to take notes. Take notes, all right? Okay, let's get started. Why do we have so many different types of airspace? You don't know what they are yet. I'll get into them. But the reasons we have all these airspace is primarily these four things: complexity or density of aircraft movement, nature of what kind of operations are happening in there, what kind of safety levels required, and then obviously public interest. Those are the reasons that the FAA, that the government says, hey, we're going to classify, we're going to take airspace, and we're going to put it into these chunks, and we're going to say, this we're using for this is for this is for this, and this is for this. That's why we have all these different types of airspace. Generally, or not generally, but the airspace, if you wanted to say, hey, this is all we have, we can do further drill down in all of these, but this is the airspace. We have controlled airspace. We have uncontrolled airspace, special use airspace, and other airspace. Those are the four things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about these four things, and we're going to break all of these down. What is controlled airspace? What is uncontrolled, special use, and other airspace? And these two we're going to get to at the end, okay? These two we'll get to at the end. Primarily, I want you to think from a big overarching standpoint. I want you to think about airspace as either being controlled or uncontrolled. Those are the big categories, because special use airspace, and there's a handful of these, there's a half a dozen or so types of special use airspace. There's a half a dozen or types of other airspace, but all of these are in this. So you could have some special use airspace that exists in controlled airspace, some that exists in uncontrolled airspace. This will make more sense as we go along. But just understand we have two big categories really of airspace: controlled and uncontrolled airspace. So the first thing we're going to talk about are controlled and uncontrolled. These special and other deals we're going to deal with later on. Okay, so I'm telling you that because mentally I want you to think about this. When you think airspace, this is really what you're thinking. You're thinking controlled or uncontrolled airspace. All right, everybody with me? Okay. Here they are. Here's your, and there are 6 of them. Okay, here they are. Right there. That's your airspace. A, B, C, D, E, and G. Those are your airspaces. That's what you need to, if you commit nothing else to memory today, when you leave class today, if you can leave, especially for you three that have had no introduction into airspace, okay? If you three leave today and you have a good understanding of what A, B, C, D, E, and G is, and what its vertical and lateral dimensions are, right? Where does it exist? How big is it and where does it exist? Then you're going away with a lot of information, okay? So I want you to focus on coming away from that. And for those of you that have had some introduction to airspace, same thing. If you, I want you to have that, and then maybe get a little deeper into some of the other special use or other airspaces. Okay? All right. This won't be the one and only time you get introduced to airspace. This is just the first time. All right. Okay. So controlled airspace, we have A, B, C, D, E. Uncontrolled airspace is G. All right. What do I mean by controlled airspace and uncontrolled airspace? Let me define that term for you so you understand what I'm talking about. Controlled airspace is airspace in which ATC, so when I say ATC, I'm talking about air traffic control. So they're the guys that are up in the tower. They're the guys that sit in buildings out in the middle of the country with no windows in it, dark, and radar screens. And they talk to planes that are flying, at 30,000 feet above, going from here to there, Air route traffic control centers. ATC is air traffic control, okay? If you are in airspace, or I should say, these airspaces are airspace in which you either must be in contact with ATC, or you could be, but choose not to be in contact with ATC. That's what controlled airspace is, okay? So it's airspace where you either must be talking to ATC, you must be in two-way radio communication with an ATC facility someplace in the country. They know who you are, they know where you are, they know what you're doing, okay? Or you're in airspace, this one, you're in airspace that you could be talking to ATC, you could be in a situation where you're being controlled by ATC, or you don't have to be. That's this one, okay? These three, you'll notice these are towered airports, right? These three are towered airports. If you're in the terminal area, so when I say terminal, anytime you hear that term, every time you hear the term terminal, we're talking about a set space around an airport. We're close to an airport. We're in a terminal area. So you can think of terminal like you go to an airport, you go to the terminal, right? You go to the terminal, you get on the airplane. Think of it that way. So in the terminal area, you're in an airspace area that is very close to an airport, okay? So it will be generally, you can think of towered airports when you think that, okay? I'll get into B, C, and D in more detail in a second, but towered airports. All right, notice I've got three airspaces here. One of them is uncontrolled that I call blanket airspaces. All right. These two blanket airspaces are in controlled airspace. This one is an uncontrolled airspace. So let's talk about what is uncontrolled airspace. Before I do that, define for me, in your words, what's controlled airspace. Just regurgitate what I said. How would you explain to your brother or sister or mom or dad what's controlled airspace?
You're talking to ATC or
could be, right. You're in airspace where you have to be, or you could be controlled by ATC. So what then you think? What then would you think uncontrolled airspace is? Where you're in airspace where they aren't controlling you. They're not going to control you. Could be a number of reasons for that. Sometimes it's because that airspace, or generally speaking, it's because that airspace is unreachable through radio or radar. Okay? So radio waves and radar waves are line of sight, right? So if I am a controller sitting on the ground over here, or in a tower or wherever, and I'm trying to talk to an airplane that's at 100 feet, 10 miles away, do you think that maybe the curvature of the earth or maybe mountains or buildings might interfere with that? And I may not be able to, number one, hear them on the radio because the signal won't penetrate whatever it's trying to go through. And the radar will do the same thing, wouldn't penetrate it, right? So I want you to think about uncontrolled airspace as airspace that's low to the ground. It's low to the ground, and therefore I might necessarily be in an area where they can't see me on radar and they can't talk to me because the line of sight signal won't do it, won't make it. Does that make sense? Okay, that's uncontrolled airspace. So where do you think, based on what I just said, where do you think uncontrolled airspace exists? Close to the ground. So G is close to the ground. And so you can think of G as ground. Think G as ground, okay? And that's a blanket airspace. So what do I mean by blanket airspace? I want you to picture making your bed. If you make your bed, I don't know. If you don't, just think of somebody making their bed. What's the first thing you put on your bed? You put a sheet on there, right? It's a really thin little sheet. You throw this sheet on the bed, okay? It's a thin sheet, and it goes, and it covers the entire bed, covers the entire mattress. Class G airspace is like that thin little sheet that you throw over the bed, but in this case, the bed is the entire continental United States. The entire United States. From the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of America to Canada. I like saying that. That's the entirety of where the Class G airspace goes. All the way across and over the mountains and over the hills and in the valleys, okay? And it extends from the surface of the ground up to an altitude of 1,200 feet above the ground. That's something you want to write down in your notes. G airspace. The vertical limits, in other words, how high, how thick is it? It goes from the ground up to 1,200 feet above the ground. Okay? Actually, let me just change to the next slide here and you'll see it a little bit better. Okay, so here's the continental United States. Here's our three blanket airspaces I talked about. So we're talking about G right now. This is uncontrolled airspace. It goes from the surface up to 1,200 feet AGL, above the ground level. So think of that thin little sheet just all over the entire United States, over the mountains and whatnot, all the way from coast to coast, from the ground up. Then we have the next blanket airspace. Now we're getting into controlled airspace because we're above 1,200 feet. So now we're high enough where in most cases we, once we get up above that 1,200 feet, we're in a place where we could get on the radio and call ATC and say, hey, you know, I'm here, there, whatever, I'm going here, there, or whatever. Or they could see us on radar, even if we're not talking to them. They could potentially, if we have the right equipment in our airplane, which we'll talk about in a minute, they could potentially see us on radar because we're high enough now where that line of sight, that radar signal will make it. That happens above 1,200 AGL. So Class E is the other blanket airspace. And think of, what do you put on your bed after you put the little thin sheet on there?
Comforter.
You put a comforter on there or a blanket or something a little bit thicker, right? So that's Class E. It goes right on top of your sheet, but it's a little bit thicker. It starts at 1,200 feet AGL and it goes all the way up to 18,000 feet MSL. MSL is main sea level. So it starts at 1,200 feet above the ground, but goes all the way up to 18,000 feet above sea level. Okay? That's a little bit thicker. And then on top of your blanket, maybe you put a comforter, and that's your next blanket airspace. That's Class A. Starts at 18,000 feet, goes all the way up to 60,000 feet MSL. And then above that, not that you need to know this, but above that, it goes back to E. Okay, so the space station is floating around in E airspace up there. Okay? So these are what I call blanket airspaces. Okay? Is that relatively easy to memorize? Do you think you guys can memorize, especially the three of you that are just seeing this for the first time? You think you can memorize that? All right, well, guess what? You got half airspace licked. You got half of it done. Right there. You got 3 of the 6 right there. All right, now I want to say something else. I want to say that when I teach this class, what I do is I teach the rule, if you will, and then I come back and I talk about the exceptions to the rule. Okay? So what's the rule for Class G airspace? Where does it start? Where does it end? In other words, what are its vertical limits? And then what are its lateral limits? Somebody give me that information. What are its vertical limits? Where does it start? Where does it end?
Around 1,200 feet.
1,200 feet what?
AGL.
AGL. What's its lateral limit, side to side?
Continental United States.
The whole United States.
Excluding other
Yep.
provinces, province.
We'll get there. Yep. That's part of the exceptions. Yeah. So the rule is you throw the sheet out there, right? That's your sheet. All right. And then what are the vertical limits and lateral limits of Class Echo airspace. Somebody give me the vertical limits. Where does it start? Where does it stop? 1200 what? AGL to what?
MSL,
18.
well, 1799.
Well, that's, yeah. Okay, so yeah, so technically, yeah. So technically, yeah, I don't even want to get into that G is from the surface to 1,199 feet, and E is from 1,200 feet to 17,999 feet, and A is from 18,000, right? Don't worry about that.
Can you really?
It's 1,200 to 18,000, no, that's the point. If you were to get a question on a written exam that asks you that, well, then you need to be precise, because FA is a little bit anal about that kind of stuff. But in reality, 1,200, 1200, ground to 1,200 to 18,000 to 60,000. All right, what are the lateral limits of Echo? The whole United States and its territories. So the whole continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, any U.S. territory, all of that, okay? All right, and then A airspace, same thing. Now, vertical limit starts at 18,000, goes up to 60, and then the entirety of the United States or continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, and territories. Okay, that's the standard. That's the rule. So if you can remember that, anytime it's not that, which there are some occasions where that is not the case, then it is clearly, and I mean very clearly, charted on aviation sectional charts. Okay, so the charts that you're going to use as we go through our training here, it looks, here's a Houston sectional. These charts right here. If what I just said, if G doesn't go from the surface to 1,200 feet, or E doesn't go from 1,200 feet up to 18,000 feet or whatever, if that's not the case, it's charted. It's clearly charted. I'm going to show you those exceptions and how you read those on a chart. But if you remember the rule, that's the best place to start, okay? All right, so you got half of airspace. We got half of airspace done. Let's look at the towered airports now. So this is everything but towered airports. So what's missing from here? What airspaces have we not talked about yet? B, C, and D. Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. So Bravo, Charlie, and Delta are airspaces that exist at airports that have an operating, that's the key word, an operating control tower. Just because there's a building there that is a control tower does not make it a B, C, or a D. There has to be people there. The lights have to be on. They have to have punched in, the time clock started, and they're actually working. The tower is operational. It's open and operational. That makes it either a Bravo, Charlie, or Delta. There are instances where the tower is not operational all the time, and they turn the lights off, lock the doors, and go home. Well, then it ceases to be a Bravo, Charlie, or Delta at that point, okay? So Bravo, Charlie, or Delta exist at airports that have an operating control tower, not just a building that's used as a control tower. Somebody has to be there working, okay? All right, so let's start with the smallest of those. The smallest of those is a Delta airport, okay? This airport that we are currently sitting at, we are currently standing and sitting in Class Delta airspace right now. We have an operating control tower. Carl and Mike and those guys are up in the tower right now working, okay? So we have a Class D airport airspace right now. They close at 7 o'clock tonight. When they close, this is no longer a Class D airspace. It turns into something else, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Class D airspace looks like this, if you kind of look at it from a three-dimensional standpoint. It's charted on the sectional chart in MSL, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. It has a speed limit. If you're inside this airspace, you have to be flying less than 200 knots, indicated airspeed. The radius, and I'll talk about the lateral limits. The radius is a 4 nautical mile ring, and its height is from the surface up to 2,500 feet above the ground. Okay? Here's what it looks like on a sectional chart. right here. This is New Braunfels right here. And you see that blue dotted line? When you see a blue dotted line on a sectional chart, you're looking at class Delta airspace, but only when the tower is operational. They can't, this blue dotted line is always here on the chart. That doesn't mean that it's always Delta. You have to recognize whether or not that tower is a full-time operating tower or not. There's a way to do that, which we'll get to here in a little bit. All right, well, I'll just tell you right now. If you look up here in the information block, see the information about this airport. It says New Braunfels Airport, BAZ, that's the identifier. The CT, the control tower frequency, is 127.05. Then it has this little star. That little star next to the control tower frequency tells you this tower is not full-time operational. So if you see a little star next to the control tower frequency, then you know that this airport is not always a Delta. This tower is not always open. All right, you go to a different publication to figure out what the times are. It doesn't tell you on here, but you know right away it's not full-time operation. If you look up here at San Marcos, here's a control tower frequency. Look, there's a star. San Marcos also closes at some point in time. Okay, this is what it looks like on the sectional. It's a blue dotted line, blue dotted circle. Okay, all right. So let's talk about Delta airports. And I'll show you an exception right now. I'm going to show you an exception on this chart right here. Right here at the surface, at the ground here, don't worry about all these symbols and stuff. We'll get to those in this class and some in other classes. But if you're on the ground right here in this area, you're standing on the ground, what airspace are you in? Everybody in this room ought to know this now. G. You're in G airspace. You're on the ground. Okay? G airspace starts at the ground and it goes up to what altitude? 1200. 1200 what? AGL. Okay. But if you're standing on the ground over here, what airspace are we in? You're in Delta. So here's an example of how G, there's an exception to G. Delta pushes it out of the way. There is no G here because Delta goes all the way to the ground. So this is an example of how it's charted. Remember I said the sheet, you got the sheet all the way across the bed, except that right here, boom, we punched a little hole in it, we put Delta on top of it. So there is no G right here. It doesn't exist, at least not while the tower's open. Okay, so that's an example of how to look at an exception to Gulf. So if you know your standards for Gulf, Echo, and Alpha, and you understand how to read the chart, you understand when those standards don't exist. There's one example right there. Okay, let's talk about Delta a little bit more. What did I say the lateral limits of Delta are? Lateral limits. 4 nautical mile radius. So that means the ring is 8 nautical miles in diameter. So this is an 8 nautical mile diameter right here. Okay. Usually. What if it's not? Well, it would be charted. You'd have a bigger ring or a smaller ring shown on the chart. But generally speaking, it's a 4 nautical mile ring. All right. What are the vertical limits?
This one is 2700. The 25.
2700 what?
Huh?
2700 what?
MSL.
So this is, remember I said on the other screen, it's charted in MSL? So this is saying 2700 MSL. But what are the vertical limits of your typical class Delta airspace? Up to 2500 AGL. All right. So I'm going to come back to this one for a second. Let's look over here at San Marcos. Look at San Marcos real quick. So San Marcos is also a Delta. You see the blue ring. Okay. And its radius from the center of the airport out is 4 miles. You got this little cutout right here. That's for a different reason. I'll talk about that in a minute. It's basically for an approach, an instrument approach into this runway right here. But this is your 4 nautical mile ring, and it has a little extension right there that you can see. Okay. The top of this airspace is what? That's what this means right here, 3,100 feet. MSL. MSL, that's height above sea level. But if we said that a standard Delta is 2,500 feet, right? Then that would mean what? What can you infer from that?
Elevation, yeah.
You can infer the elevation of the airport being somewhere around 600 feet. And if you look right here, you see the elevation of that airport's 595 feet. So if you go up 2,500 feet from the ground, you end up at 3,100 feet above sea level. So that checks. That's 2,500 feet above ground level. That's your standard delta. That's what a standard delta looks like. You can think about it like a, I don't know, I kind of think about it like a tuna can, right? Looks like a tuna can just stuck there. It's 2,500 feet tall, and it's 4 nautical mile radius or 8 nautical mile diameter. Just a little cylinder sitting right on top of that airport. That's the controlled airspace that that tower has control over. That ATC facility has control over this, the people flying in and around inside that little tuna can. That's what they control. Okay, that's their airspace. Let's look at New Braunfels now. So based on this, what's the elevation of New Braunfels Airport?
19 AGL.
If you subtract 2,500 feet from that, what's the elevation?
Should be more than that.
Right, so now look here. The elevation of the airport's 658 feet, so you round that up to 700. Round that up to 700, right? And if you subtract 700 from 27, what's the height of this airspace in AGL? It's only 2,000 feet. So this tuna can's a little shorter over our airspace here for whatever reason. I'm sure it has to do with our proximity to San Antonio and to you know, the Air Force bases and whatnot. It probably has something to do with that. But for whatever reason, at this particular airport, they did not allow our airspace to go up that additional 500 feet. Whatever. All right, great. But it's clearly charted. It's right there. You don't have to worry about it too much. You do want to remember and understand the basic rule of Class Delta Airport, which is this stuff right here. Surface to 2,500 feet, 4 nautical miles, charted in MSL. So this 2,500 feet AGL is charted in height above sea level. In fact, I'm going to say something right now. When you look at a sectional chart, this is important to remember. When you look at a sectional chart, which is what we're looking at here, every number you see on there that represents an altitude or an elevation is given to you in sea level altitude, unless it has a parenthesis around it. If it has a parenthesis around it, it's telling you AGL, okay? So here's an example of a couple of towers right here. See these towers? Those are towers. Those aren't little hills, those are towers, okay? Not little teepees either. There's not an Indian reservation over here. Those are towers, 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 towers. These are all towers is what these are showing you. Here's a couple of towers together there, and you see two numbers over here. You see 867 and 365. 867 is height above sea level. 365 is height above ground level. So those towers are 365 feet tall. So if you want to know what the elevation of the ground is right there, subtract 365 from 867, you'll know what the elevation of the ground is right there at those towers. Does that make sense? Okay, so every number you see on here that represents a height or an elevation is given to you in height above sea level, unless you see it in parentheses. So what do you think this 14 represents right here? 14, it's 1,400, first of all. Is that height above ground or height above sea level? Sea level. What's this one right here mean?
Obstacle is 799 above sea level.
Above sea level. It's not telling you how tall it is. It's not telling you what the AGL is for some reason on that one, right? But everything you see on here, what does that represent? 3,100 feet what? MSL, sea level. Sea level. Everything you see, unless it has parentheses, is a sea level number. Just remember that. Okay? All right, so there's delta. So now we've got alpha cover. Well, we didn't talk about alpha, did we? We just talked about echo and golf. Let's go back and talk about alpha real quick. Alpha is the other blanket airspace. It's controlled airspace, and it's 18,000 and up. Nobody in this room anytime in the next at least year or two is going up there, okay? You have to be instrument rated, and you have to be on an IFR flight plan to fly in alpha. I shouldn't say that. We're probably all going to get there, but we won't be piloting the airplane. We'll be sitting in the back drinking a margarita or something. But you'll be in alpha airspace. When you're flying on the airlines, going to visit grandma or whoever, you're in alpha airspace. That's where they go. They get up into alpha airspace. Okay? But we're not going there. Most all the flying you're going to do as a general aviation pilot is going to be in which airspace? Which one of those airspaces? E. E, by far, E. 90% of the time that you're flying, you're going to be in, or more, you're going to be in E airspace. That's where you're generally flying. Okay, so there's Delta airspace, and that's a towered airport as long as what? It's a towered airport when? When the tower is open and operational. If the tower is closed, it is no longer a Delta. And when it's no longer a Delta, can I see that book real quick? No, the book, your chart supplement, yeah. This is called a chart supplement. All right, and and it covers these airports right here. This is the South Central U.S. and so Texas is involved in that. So if you ask yourself, hey, when New Braunfels closes, when the tower, first of all, when does the tower close? I don't know. Does it close at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 11 o'clock? When's it close? When's it open? Right? This is where you get that information. What airspace does it turn into when it closes? This is where you get that information. Okay. So if you want information, detailed information about any airport, this is the book. You could buy the book. You can also get it online. Anything that the FAA publishes, anything is free online. If you want to buy a printed version, you got to pay for the printed version. But anything and everything that the FAA, that the government publishes is free. You pay for it in your taxes. Okay. So we've covered the blanket airspaces, Alpha, Echo, and Golf. All right. Where does Golf start and end? Ground level. 12,000. 12,000. 1,200. 1,200. 200. Yeah, 1,200. Right. Okay. What about Echo? Where does Echo start and end? Echo. Where does it start? 1,200 feet. AGL or MSL? Well, 1,200. Does it start at 1,200 MSL or 1,200 above ground? Above ground up to what? 18,000. Okay. All right. So we've gotten all of our blanket airspaces taken care of. We've gotten Delta taken care of. Right? Does everyone have a good grasp on, especially the three new guys, have a good grasp on what Delta is? Okay. What conditions have to exist for Delta to exist? Operational control tower. You got to have a control tower, and somebody's got to be in there manning it, staffing it. It's got to be open, operating. All right, let's look at Charlie. Charlie is the next level up of towered airports. Now we're getting into a little bit busier, okay? And they look like this. They look like this, and they have a couple of rings to them, if you will. You have an area that, another tuna can, if you will, that sits at the surface, and then you have another little shelf that sits on top of that. Okay? And here's the situation with Charlie airports. Again, everything charted, all of the elevations, all of the vertical limits for this airport, for Charlie airports, are going to be charted in MSL, right? But your standards for a Charlie airport are this: the surface area, the radius is 4 to 5 miles. So this ring is 4 or 5 miles in a radius. So 8 to 10 miles in diameter. Okay, that surface area. Then you have a shelf area that sits on top of that. That shelf area starts at 1,200 feet AGL, the floor. So in other words, the floor of the shelf starts right where Gulf ends, right? So it's kind of level with Gulf, and then above that would be Echo, right? And then it goes up to the top of it is 4,000 feet AGL. So think of like a simple little cake. You got a base, and then you got one topper on it. Take that cake and flip it upside down. And that's what a Charlie looks like. Okay? So you got this surface area sits on the ground, 4 nautical miles, 4 or 5 nautical miles in radius, and it goes up, that little surface area goes up to 1,200 feet, and then you have on top of that, you have a shelf area that is 10 miles in radius, so 20 miles in diameter, that sits on top of that and goes up to 4,000 feet AGL. Okay? Again, you got a speed limit in there of 200 knots indicated within 4 nautical miles and below the outer ring, and 250 knots indicated within the outer ring. So if you're If you're in the outer ring, you can be going a little faster. Right now in your training, we don't need to worry about speed limits. We're not going anywhere near those kind of speeds. But for you guys, you're going to start flying bigger, faster, professionally. You're going to be aware of these speed limits. Okay. All right. Here's what it looks like on the chart. This is San Antonio. San Antonio and Austin are both Charlie airports, and you'll notice that it's depicted with. Is anybody colorblind in here? Okay. Because there's other ways to show you how to look at this. But if you're not colorblind, then these thicker magenta rings indicate Charlie airspace. So when you see that, you know right away, I'm looking at Charlie airspace. Okay? You see that? You know you got Charlie airspace. There are a lot of, and look here, if you will, at the information block, you see it's San Antonio International, SAT, that's the identifier. Control tower is 119.8. Notice there's no star next to it. What does that mean? There's somebody there 24 hours a day. That tower never closes.
What about the star right above the diagram? I was trying to look for that.
That right there, that means it has an operating beacon,
Oh,
a rotating beacon. That's what that means. Okay, so this airport, this tower never closes. So this airspace is always Charlie airspace. Now, you might think, well, that makes sense because that's a pretty busy airport. Charlie airports are going to be pretty busy, so they're going to be operating all the time. Not so. There are a lot, I mean a bunch of Charlie airports that close. A bunch.
Really?
A bunch. You see them all over the place. So how do you know? You got to look right here. If you see that star, that tower closes. There's a lot of Charlie airports that are not 24-hour operational 24 hours a day. So be aware of that.
That seems odd.
It does seem odd because you'd think that's a pretty busy airport,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But there's a lot of them that do that close. They're just not. What's that?
what about Bravos?
I don't know of any Bravos that close, but I could be wrong on that. I just don't. I don't know of any off the top of my head that close. But there could be some that close. It'd probably be easy to Google. Yeah. All right. So here's what we're looking at on the chart when we look at a Charlie airport. So you see the surface area right here. So this is the ring. This is the ring, and this is the surface part. And this is what is the 4 or 5 nautical mile radius right here. And you'll notice right here, it's giving us the lateral limits are charted. The vertical limit are charted like this. The vertical limits are shown right here. So this little piece, this little tube right here, this little tube right here goes from the surface up to 4,800 feet. That's the top. That little cylinder right there, from the surface up to 4,800 feet. Then the shelf area here, the shelf area goes from 2,000 feet MSL up to 4,800 feet. So the top of this thing is flat at 4,800 feet. Okay, see that? All right. Where does, based on this, the floor of the shelf area starts at 1,200 feet AGL. All right, so 2,000 feet minus 1,200 feet would be what, 800 feet? So we could assume that the airport elevation is 800 feet. Well, if you look at the airport elevation, it's 809 feet. Always round that, so 800 feet, so that'd be about right. But look what happens here in this case. If we come around here, you see a line right here. You see a line right here. So this piece right here starts at 2,000 and goes up to 48. But this piece in here starts at 22 and goes up to 48. So here's an exception, a charted exception to that, right? So this is your standard, but any exception is charted. And there's the charted exception right there. This little piece starts at 22 and goes up to 48. Why do you think that does? Why do you think that is? Gotta be some reason there.
Just the way the traffic funnels in, it just marks.
It could be traffic. It could be traffic. In this case, it's not. It could be though. What happens for you guys from around here? You guys from Texas? From this area of Texas?
They're military.
It could be that too, but it's geography. This is hill country. The terrain starts rising over here. And so because that terrain starts rising, they bring this up a little bit to give you a little extra space there. So that's the reason for it. So it's a terrain reason in this case. Okay, but it could be traffic and other things. All right, so this is what Charlie looks like. A thick magenta line, a larger magenta line, or a magenta circle. And you have those two rings. Okay, now let's look at Bravo. Bravo is the biggest, the busiest of all the airports. Bravo are going to be your Dallas Fort Worths, your Houstons, your Chicago O'Hare, you know, LA, big, I mean the biggest, busiest airports. That's what those are. Okay. With the other towered airports, it was fairly easy for me to give you some standardized sizes, both vertically and laterally. Right? I gave you pretty standardized sizes, both vertically and laterally. And then, of course, those change based on needs. But when it comes to Bravo, there's not a lot of things I can tell you that are standard. I can give you a few standards, but otherwise, Bravo, those things are cut up and designed to accommodate the flow of traffic in and out of those airports. Okay? So there's some general things. Generally speaking, there's going to be a surface area. There's got to be a part of Bravo that hits the ground because the airplanes have to hit the ground. They got to land, take off and land. So there's got to be a portion of Bravo that actually comes in contact with the ground. There has to be a surface area of Bravo. That's a given, okay? If that surface area is round, so usually they are, but they don't have to be. I'll show you an example if we have time of LAX. It is just anything but round. If it's round, its radius is going to be whatever it needs to be. Might be 6 miles, might be 10 miles, whatever. It's whatever they need to accommodate the flow of traffic in and out of there. Okay. All right. As far as shelves go, as far as these shelves go, where with a Charlie, how many shelves do we have with Charlie Airspace? One shelf. With Bravo, you're going to have multiple shelves. Multiple shelves. How many? Many as they need. Where do they start? Wherever they need to start. That's the answer. There is no answer. You have to look at the chart for every specific Bravo and figure out what this one holds. Where's this one? Where does this one start where does it start vertically and where's it starting in laterally? You have to look at the chart. They're highly modified. Okay? The top of a Bravo, usually, generally speaking, and even this isn't always correct, but generally speaking, you can think of 10,000 feet MSL. 10,000 feet MSL. Generally speaking, I got it here somewhere. Yeah, approximately 10,000 feet MSL. Okay? And then the radius, the maximum radius at the top, if it's round, is 30 nautical miles. So that means that from the diameter of these Bravos is 60 nautical miles. That's a huge chunk. So think of that little delta. That delta is an 8 nautical mile diameter. The Bravo is a 60 nautical mile diameter. So here's your Bravo, here's your delta. Here's your Charlie, here's your Bravo. They're giant chunks of airspace, okay? All right, the other thing that every Bravo will have is something called a Mode C veil. Mode C veil, okay. A Mode C veil, when you hear the term Mode C, what's being referred to is a transponder. All right, who does not know what a transponder is in here? I would expect 3 people to raise their hand. Anybody else not know? Okay, a couple people don't know what a transponder is. All right. When we use radar, when radar was developed back in World War II, what happened is you send out a signal, you send out an electronic beam. All right, and this radar gets sent out, and it's spinning around and sending out a signal. If it hits an airplane or a bird or a flock of birds or something, it'll hit that object and return an echo or a signal back. It'll bounce back off of whatever it hit. and the time it takes for the signal to go out and to hit that object and to come back, mathematically, the radar can say, okay, well, that object is this far out, and it happens to be there because that's where I was at when it came back. Okay, then it comes back around again. Now that object's moved over here. It comes back around again. So boom, now it's over here. So using radar, you can figure out, hey, there's something over here, located right here, moving in this direction, and then you can figure out how fast it's going. That's how radar, basic radar works, right? All right. It doesn't give us a lot of information. It doesn't give air traffic control a lot of information if you use that kind of basic radar. They call it primary radar. But if you put something in your airplane, if we have a piece of equipment in our airplane that when that radar signal hits us, that piece of equipment says, oh, hey, it's me, and sends that information back. Now the radar guy knows, oh, that's Delbert. Okay, so we can send information back to the radar facility if we have a piece of equipment in our airplane to do that. That piece of equipment is called a transponder. That's what a transponder is. So if you have a transponder in your airplane, depending on the type of transponder you could have a mode A, a mode S, a mode C. There's different modes of transponders, okay? Different modes of transponders send back different types of information. Does that make sense? I don't want to get too detailed in it. A mode C transponder is kind of a generic term for a transponder that sends back altitude information.
But also the number.
Well, it won't send back. It'll send back your whatever you have put. If you have 1200, it'll send back 1200 and what your altitude is. Yeah, it'll send back a squawk code. All transponders will send back a squawk code, but not all of them will tell them what altitude they're at.
What's the definition for generic transponder going to be?
Well, a generic transponder, what I'm saying is mode S transponder send back altitude, mode C transponder send back. There's when you hear the term mode C transponder, what you want to encode in your brain is that's a transponder that sends back what is my altitude. Not only where am I at, but what altitude am I at. So if I'm a radar operator, and here's my radar screen, and my radar is, sweeping, it's going around, and it picks up a little blip right here, and it comes around again, then that blip is right here, comes around again, that blip's right here, blips right here. We can make an assumption that whatever this is traveling in that direction, right? But I have no idea what altitude it's at. I just know it's there traveling in that direction, and I can calculate the speed it's traveling. I have no idea what altitude it's at. But if this object, this airplane or whatever it is, has a mode C transponder, every time the radar hits it, it sends back a signal to me and says, hey, I'm at 3,000 feet or whatever. So now I, as the radar operator, know not only that I may not be talking to this guy. In most cases, I don't have to be talking to him. He just has to have a transponder in his airplane sending out information that allows me to know that he's there and what altitude he's at. That's all that a mode C transponder will do.
It doesn't give like 448 Romeo Alpha or something like that.
It does. Transponder doesn't. ADSB out does. That's different. We'll talk a little bit about that, but right now I'm just talking about a mode C valve.
That's not the transponder sending that. That's
No.
ADSB.
Right. That's the ADSB sending that. Now, if I called this guy and said, hey, let's say you called me and say, hey, Dave, I'm traveling this way and I want flight following. I want to be under your control. I'm in Echo Airspace and I want to be under your control. And I say something like squawk 1, 2, 3, 4. And you put 1, 2, 3, 4 in your little transponder box inside your airplane. Now, when your blip comes up as 1, 2, 3, 4, 4,000 feet or whatever altitude you're at. I know, and you told me your end number was 261 Romeo Alpha, so I tag it. Now that little thing going across the screen says 261 Romeo Alpha, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4,000. So I'm tagging it as the radar operator. Okay. But if you don't call me and you're just flying VFR, I know some of this doesn't make sense to you guys yet. If you're just flying VFR, what do we put in our transponder? What code? 1200. So what's going to happen is there will be no aircraft number, and this will simply say 1200 and your altitude. So me as the radar operator, I see you here. I see you moving that way. I see you're at 4,000 feet. If you have a mode C transponder, I see that you're at 4. If you don't, I just see 1,200 and you're going that way. I got no idea what altitude you're at. But if you have a mode C transponder, I see you're here, you're going that way, and you're at whatever altitude you're at. The reason that helps me is because if, let's say I'm controlling a guy over here, I'm talking to him, and I'm flying him this way. Well, I know everything about him because I'm talking to him. I got no idea what altitude you're at, so now I have to route him because I'm not talking to you. So I've got to move him way out of the way because you want to be flying through there without a mode C transponder, and I don't know what altitude you're at. And I don't want to run him into you, right? But if you have a mode C transponder, now I have a little more comfort in knowing that he's at 10,000, you're at 4,000, I'm just going to send him right over the top of you. That make sense?
Why it's really important to not bust a Bravo.
Well, that's one reason it's really important not to bust a Bravo, yes. Plus you really don't want to, plus you don't want to get that phone call.
Right.
And you will get it.
So when you have a, like in our plane that we fly, it's just giving you a blip that you're there.
So our planes have mode C transponders. So whenever either Austin or San Antonio, which are the two facilities that have radar, that have terminal radar. This airport does not have terminal radar. Deltas don't. We'll talk about that in a minute. Only Bravos and Charlies have terminal radar, which means only Bravos and Charlies are able to see us on a radar screen. And when they see us, they see 1,200. They see this. If we're at 4,000 feet, they see this, 1,200, and they see what direction we're moving. If they turn on their ability to see ADSB, they will also see our N number. But they don't always, and they don't have to have them turned on, they don't always have them turned on. Okay?
But they don't see the altitude we're at.
They do, because we have mode C transponders.
Oh.
That's the reason that whenever, one of the checklist items is what? Transponder 1,200, altitude mode.
Right. 1200
When you put it in altitude mode, that means you're putting into mode C so that they're going to pick up the altitude. Our transponders, you can either have them, you can have them in 3 positions essentially, on, or you can have them in 4 positions, off. It's not on at all. You have on, standby, or altitude. We always want it in altitude. That's why it's on the checklist, because we want ATC not only to see us, but to know what altitude we're at. So whenever the radar sweeps us, we want our transponder to say, here's our altitude. Here's our altitude.
That's what I always thought.
Right.
Now here I got a bit confused as you're telling us.
Well, you could...
Because it has 1,200 on there.
Because 1,200 just means they see 1,200. But because you have altitude, they also see 4,000.
Also giving. Okay.
If you turn it to on, all they're going to see is 1,200. They're not going to see an altitude readout.
It has to have.
It has to be in that mode where it's transmitting altitude.
Okay.
That is a mode C transponder. Okay?
Now I get it.
You got that? Okay. You guys kind of understand that a little bit? What I'm talking about there? All right. All right, so Bravo airports, I got a little sidetracked there, I apologize. So mode C veil, what the mode C veil means, and these only exist at Bravo airports. Mode C veils are a 30 nautical mile ring around the geographic center of a Bravo airport. So if you are anywhere in that 30 nautical mile ring or 60 mile swath, even if you're not in the Bravo. So as an example, what if you're flying down here? Underneath the shelf, are you in the Bravo? No. No, you're in Echo. If you're high enough, you're in Echo probably, right? All right. So you're in Echo here, but the mode C veil is 30 nautical miles out. Anywhere in the mode C veil, you have to have a mode C transponder. That's what a mode C veil means. So if you're flying under the shelf area of a Bravo airport, so anywhere from the surface, all the way out to the other shelf, all the way up to the top, all of this area, you have to have a mode C transponder. You cannot legally fly there without a transponder that is telling the ATC guy what altitude you're at. Here's the perfect example. Let's say that I'm flying, I'm under the shelf. Here's my flight path. I'm going like this. and I'm at 1,000 feet, let's say, and that keeps me underneath the shelf all the way. I'm just underneath it, okay? So here's me, I'm flying like this, but I don't have a Mode C transponder. Well, the tower guy sees me, but he has no idea what altitude I'm at. He just knows I'm flying right through here. How can he then separate other traffic coming into land at this airport or taking off and flying out of this airport? He has no idea what altitude I'm at. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
This is why you have to have, even if you're not talking to them, they have to know what altitude you're at because they have to keep the people they are talking to separated from you, and they have to know what altitude you're at. That's why you must have a Mode C transponder within the Mode C veil of a Delta, okay? I'm gonna back up now since it's a good place to talk about it since we're talking about Mode C. I wanna come back to here and I'm gonna say the same thing with respect to a Class Charlie airport. You don't have a Mode C veil. You don't have a Mode C veil, but what you do have to still have is Mode C transponder anytime you're within the airspace itself or under the shelf all the way down to the surface and all the way up to 10,000 feet. MSL. So in that cone, if you're in that cone right there, this 20 nautical mile not cone, cylinder. This 20 nautical mile cylinder from the surface all the way up to 10,000 feet MSL, you got to have a Mode C transponder. For the same reason that I laid out over here, for the exact same reason. Bravos and Charlies both have, what do I mean when I say terminal? How did I define that in the beginning? When I say terminal, what do you think about? Airport area, okay. Both Charlies and Bravos have terminal area radar. So that means that there is an approach, there's a guy that we classify as an approach controller. So if I'm approaching this airport, the approach controller gets me in the airspace and he controls me. He's the guy that's making sure that I don't run into somebody that's flying underneath here or over the top of here, completely out of the Charlie airspace, but you gotta have a Mode C transponder because just because he's flying up here, what it looks like to me is here's a guy right here. I don't know what altitude he's at. I have to know what altitude he's at or I can't separate my people from him. Logical, right?
I mean, it's perfect.
Perfect sense, right? Okay, so with a Charlie, this cylinder, this what ends up being a 20 nautical mile cylinder from the surface up to 10,000 feet, you gotta have Mode C transponder. Gotta have Mode C transponder. With the Bravo, same thing. From the surface, but now it goes 30 nautical mile ring, because that goes out 30 nautical miles from the surface up to 10,000 feet. Now, with a Bravo, where's the top of the Bravo typically go? 10,000 feet. So you're already going up there, right? Okay. And the reason is hopefully very easy to understand. We don't want guys in their Cessnas running into 737s. The 737s are being controlled by the terminal radar controllers at that airport, but they're not talking to us in our little Cessnas, our little general aviation airplanes, or they might not be. If they are, then they can keep us separated, but we can be flying under here and not be talking to them. That's perfectly legal. We're not in their airspace. Now, if we're in their airspace, we have to be talking to them. But we're down here, we're not in their airspace. We can be talking to them. I mean, we can be flying without talking to them. So they have to know what altitude we're at. That's why that's so important. Okay? All right. What does a Bravo look like on the chart? This is Dallas. Dallas-Fort Worth. And what the Bravo looks like is a thick blue line. See the thick blue line? All right, and you've got a surface area here, and then you have multiple shelf areas, and the number of shelf areas and where they start at They always go up to the top. Usually they go up to the very top of the airspace. But where they start at it just depends. Depends on what's necessary for that specific airspace. So you can see with the situation here at Dallas, this surface area goes from the surface up to 11,000 feet. So here's this example. Dallas goes above 10,000 feet, goes up to 11,000 feet. So these are, generally it's 10,000 feet, but it could be a little different. It just depends. Depends on what they need, right? Okay, this shelf area out here starts at 3,000 MSL, goes up to 11,000 feet. This shelf area out here starts at 4,000, goes up to 10,000 feet. So that one doesn't go as high. That just goes to 10,000, this little section here. Over here, it goes from 6,000 feet to 11,000 feet. Okay, so flying in, through, or around Bravo airspace can be very complicated. Very complicated. So as a VFR pilot, which we all are going to be when you get your license, VFR, initially you'll just be a VFR pilot. Non-instrument rated pilot, okay? When you're flying around this kind of airspace, you want to be very, very situationally aware of what's going on and locationally aware of where you are and what the airspace limitations are and everything that's happening here. The other thing that you will likely always see around these Bravo airports are multiple satellite Deltas and or even Charlie airports. So around here, there's no Charlies there, but here's a Delta, here's a Delta, here's a Delta, 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 all over the place. So you've got multiple satellite airports that are around these larger airports, okay? All right. So we have covered all of the main airspaces, A, B, C, D, E, and G, right? A, B, C, D, E, and G. So tell me, what are the blanket airspaces? And Gulf. What are the towered airspaces?
Bravo, Delta, Charlie.
And when are the towered airspaces towered? When are they Bravo, Delta, or Charlie?
When the tower's operational.
When the tower's operational. Okay. All right. How do you know the tower's operational full time or not?
If it has a star next to the radio.
The frequency, control tower frequency. Right. It'll have a little star. If it has a star, it's not 24 hours a day. Right. Okay. All right. Let's take 5 minutes and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll get back and then I'm going to start talking about the exceptions to some of those rules. Okay. All right. So we have covered the blanket airspaces. We have covered the towered airspaces. Generally speaking, when we say airspace, remember I said the two overarching types of airspace are what?
Blanket and tower.
Well, yes, but there was another thing I said, the over controlled and uncontrolled. Controlled and uncontrolled, right? And of those, in those we have 6 classes, A, B, C, D, E, and G. G is the only one that's uncontrolled. Why is G uncontrolled? What's the reason that we say it's uncontrolled? Think of the definition of controlled versus uncontrolled.
The radar doesn't reach.
You can't reach it. Can't get radar and or radio signal might not be able to reach you because you're at such a low altitude. So uncontrolled is that low altitude stuff. It's low altitude stuff. Okay. Generally speaking, that's what I want you to think about. Controlled airspace is, goes up from there. Okay. The largest of the airspaces we're going to fly in, forget alpha for a minute, right? Because why? Why do we not talk too much about alpha in this class?
We're never going to be up there.
Why? You need an instrument rating, and you got to be on an IFR flight plan, right? And you need to be flying an airplane that probably is either you got to have supplemental oxygen or it needs to be a what do you call it? Pressurized airplane. So we're not going to be up there much. So taking alpha out of it, just looking at B, C, D, E, and G, which one of those has the biggest area of airspace? E. E, 1,200 feet to 18,000 feet across the entire United States. That's where you're going to be 99% of the time that you're flying. That's where you're going to be, in echo airspace. So generally when we talk about it, when we talk about things like cloud distance requirements and visibilities and that kind of stuff, you know, we're talking about, you know, what is it in that big giant swath of airspace that you're usually flying in. We're going to talk about the, you know, what it is in all of them, but that's kind of where your mind kind of wants to be. All right, I want to talk about some exceptions now. So we talked a lot heavily about what is the rule. Where does G start? Where does it end? Where does E start? Where does it end? Where does A start? Where does it end? We talked about the vertical and lateral limits of those things. We talked about the lateral and vertical limits of Delta, Charlie, and Bravo, which are towered airports when the tower is operational. All right. When you're looking at those towered airports, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, it is always clearly charted. I mean, you can see the lateral limits, right? You see the ring. If it's Delta, how is a Delta shown on a chart? What's the ring? How do you look at a ring for a Delta and know it's a Delta? Blue dash line. How do you look at the rings for a Charlie and know it's a Charlie? Magenta solid line. How do you know? How do you look at the rings for a Bravo and know it's a Bravo? Blue solid. Okay, so there you go. There's your Delta, your Charlie, and your Bravos. Very simple to see, and you can see the lateral limits right there. It's just printed right on there. You can see the vertical limits by looking at the numbers here. Where does it start? Where does it stop? Okay, but let's talk about exceptions to those two blanket airspaces, Gulf and Echo. There's some exceptions there. Okay, where does Gulf start? How high does it go? 1,200 feet AGL. All right, so could Gulf start anywhere lower than the ground? No, so you're never going to have an exception that's below ground, right? So therefore, logically, we'd say that the only exceptions to Gulf would be to its height. So the only exceptions we're ever going to see to Gulf are going to be to its height, okay? Where does Echo start? 1,200 feet. Okay. So using that logic that we just used for Gulf, if we're going to make an exception to Echo, we're not going to go up, we're going to go down. Because if Gulf goes up, then that's already telling us where Echo is starting. So the exception to Gulf would push Echo up out of the way. Does that make sense? So if we're going to talk about exceptions to Echo, we're not going to go up, we're going to go down and push Gulf out of the way. That make sense? Okay. So if we're talking about an exception to Gulf, we're going to go, the exception would be that it doesn't stop at 1,200 feet, it goes higher than 1,200 feet. If we're going to make an exception to Echo, it would be that it doesn't start at 1,200 feet, it starts lower than 1,200 feet. Everybody with me? When you see Gulf exceptions, they're charted in blue. When you see Echo exceptions, they're charted in magenta. Okay? Gulf is blue, Echo is magenta. All right? So I want to talk about Gulf exceptions. There's only a couple of Gulf exceptions, and you're only going to see them in a couple of places. So I want to talk about those first. You see Echo exceptions all over the chart. They are everywhere on the chart. Meaning what? If you have an Echo exception, what does that mean? What does an Echo exception mean? Echo goes down from 1,200 feet. That's when you see an Echo exception, it means it goes down from 1,200 feet. It starts at a lower altitude than 1,200 feet. When you see a Gulf exception, it means what? It goes up. It means it ends at something higher than 1,200 feet. Okay. So let me go over Gulf exceptions first. Here's an exception and generally you're going to see them in places like this, out over the water. Okay, usually. Sometimes you see them up in the mountains too, but usually this type of exception you see out over the water. So here's Key West, right? Here's the Keys coming out. Here's Key West. So you see this blue zipper symbol? When you see that blue zipper, that's a Gulf exception. That's how an exception to Gulf is charted. So if I'm talking about an exception to Gulf, I'm talking about what? I'm talking about where does Gulf end? It's going to start at the ground, or in this case, the water. Okay, but how high does it go? All right, well, if I look inside here, I see it goes from the sea level to 1,300 feet. I go out here, it goes up to 2,700 feet. So in these cases, Gulf is going up. So where does echo start? If I'm flying out here, where does echo start? 2,700 feet, 2,701 or whatever, right? If I'm flying inside here, Gulf goes to 1,200. This is where the exception begins this way. So in here, Gulf is flying along the Keys right here. Gulf is from the surface to 1,200 feet AGL. Well, once I get out past this line right here, Gulf goes up another 100 feet. Get out past here, it goes up to 2,700 feet. Okay, so it's clearly charted. So when you see that zipper or that board-on-board look, and it's blue, that means that there's an exception to Gulf, and you'll find it over here wherever it'll say it. It'll chart what that exception is. All right, there's one other exception to Gulf. The easiest way to do this is to back out of this and take you into something else here. Go here. Go to Sky Vector. And let me turn off all of this stuff. All right. So this is just this is all a big giant sectional chart, okay? And when you zoom in here to the San Antonio area, right where we're at, here it is. There's our sectional chart. There's us right there. There's New Braunfels right there, okay? All right, if you look way over here in West Texas, right here, you see that blue faded? This blue faded, kind of a thick faded line. It's sharp here and it fades in this direction. You see that?
Yeah.
It's blue. That's an exception to what?
G.
Gulf. And when we talk about exceptions to Gulf, we're saying that Gulf goes higher, right? 14,500 feet MSL. So those are the two exceptions to Gulf you're going to see. You're going to see that zipper. When you see the zipper, it's going to tell you this is where Gulf goes up to. When you see this, it goes up to 14,500 feet. Now, in this case, do you think that going up to 14,500 feet, do you think we got to be higher than that to be able to get out on the radio or to be seen on radar? Probably not. But there ain't nothing going on over here. There's just nothing here. Nothing. Yes.
That's 14,500 feet.
14,500 feet, MSL.
Yeah, there's not a lot.
There's not a lot going on there, right? So you got 14,500 feet. So those are your Gulf exceptions. Pretty simple. You really just have those two. You see this, you don't see this much. You see this here in West Texas, and you see some in Alaska, and you see over here, right here. There's one right there. This one is more due to mountainous terrain. This one's due more to mountainous terrain. But there's a Gulf exception right there, that blue faded line. So
you could
this
fly in there, but it's also an MOA, is it not?
it's an MOA. We'll talk. That's a type of special use airspace, which we'll talk about at the end. Yeah. But I don't want to get confused with all these other things. Remember, I said special use airspace and other airspace is simply found within A, B, C, D, E, or G. It's inside of those airspace. So your main categories of airspace, your main class, your main categories, there's two. What are the two main categories? Controlled and uncontrolled. Within controlled and uncontrolled, we have 6 classes, A, B, C, D, E, and G. Within those A, B, C, D, E, and G, we could have types of special use airspace or other airspace. Okay? All right, now let's talk about the exceptions to echo. So we have 2 exceptions to Gulf. What are they? What did we just talk about? What were the 2 exceptions to Gulf? The zipper or the board on board. And it's what color?
Blue
Blue. And that means Gulf does what?
goes higher.
Goes higher and how high? Whatever it says. Whatever it says on the sectional chart. And then you have the faded blue from a solid to and it fades out, and that means exception to Gulf goes up to 14.5. 14.5. Okay. Now let's look at exceptions to echo. When we look at exceptions to echo, we're saying, our mind is saying, okay, echo's not starting at 1,200 feet AGL, it's starting lower than 1,200 feet AGL. And those are shown in magenta. Okay? The biggest, most obvious one you see right here. You see all those magenta circles all over the place? They're everywhere. Those are all echo exceptions. So what does that mean? What's happening to echo there, just generally? Is it going up or down? It's going down. It's starting at a lower elevation. Let's zoom in on one. So here, it's also a faded, but now it's a faded magenta, solid fading in, where the blue was solid fading out. Solid fading in, okay? And anytime you see this, so this whole area over here, right here, if you look at how this is connected, this whole area right here, all of this, in this entire area, echo starts lower than 1,200 feet. It starts at 700 feet. So anytime you see this, so here, within this section right here, echo is starting at 700 feet. Everywhere you see those. Echo starting at 700 feet. Echo starting at 700 feet. That's an exception to echo. It's an exception to where it starts. Okay? So it starts at a lower altitude. So if I'm flying along right here at 1,000 feet AGL, what airspace am I in right here along this line?
I'm sorry, G.
I'm in G. But as soon as I go into here, now I'm in echo. Now I'm back to G. Now I'm back to echo. Now I'm back to G, back to echo, back to G. If I'm at 1,000 feet, I'm flying in and out of those airspaces. Does that make sense? Okay. That's the most prominent exception to echo that you see. You can't open a sectional chart anywhere to any place in the United States without seeing that exception to echo. And notice where they typically happen. Where do they typically happen? Around airports. Can you, based on kind of what we've discussed already, using a little bit of logic, why do you think that is? Why do you think that might be?
You want more control around these little municipal airports.
It'd be nice. It would be nice if you're on an instrument flight plan. That means, for some of you guys, that means that you're flying not by reference to looking outside, you're flying by reference to looking at the instruments. So it doesn't assume, but it allows you to fly in conditions where you're in the clouds. You can't see anything, right? So in those conditions, you can't see other traffic. So you have to rely on ATC and the radar to keep you from running into other people. You have to rely on them for traffic separation. Well, if I'm flying into this airport right here under instrument conditions, I sure would like to get lower to the airport before ATC says, good luck, you're on your own now. I'd like to get an extra 500 feet down maybe. That's why. That's why we lower that controlled airspace over the top of airports, so we can either take off and get in their control quicker, or coming into land stay under their control longer before we have to be kind of in the wild, wild west of uncontrolled airspace. All right? So that's why we have those. That's why that lowers.
But these aren't even, tower controlled airports.
No, they're not tower controlled airports, but you could still fly into that.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so that's an exception to echo. Another exception to echo that you see frequently, get back to our area of the world over here. So here's Austin right there, Austin Bergstrom. So what kind of airspace is that?
Charlie.
That's a Charlie, that's Austin airspace. All right, let me get up here around, right up here. Here we go. Zoom in this area right here. All right, what do we have? What do we have here? What kind of airspace is this right here? Delta. All right, look at this one over here. What do you think that is? It's a dotted line. Is it a delta? Why isn't it a delta? It's not blue. It's magenta, which tells me it's some kind of an exception to echo. This is a surface echo. So here, where does echo start? All the way at the ground. Echo goes all the way to the surface on that one. There's no tower, there's no control tower, but gulf does not exist in here. It's echo. In this case, it's echo from the ground all the way up to 18,000 feet. And then it turns into alpha. So anytime you see that dashed magenta circle, you got to look at the color, because you might think, oh, that's an echo, that's a delta. Well, it's not a delta because it's magenta. If it were blue, it'd be a delta. It's magenta. So that's a surface area echo. Okay?
Question.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a parachute by Skylark.
Yeah.
If there's any place where there's typical parachuting,
Yeah.
it has to be noted on.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be. Usually is. If it's a drop zone, if it's a your regular, when I used to skydive, we used to skydive at airports. A lot of them were just in pastures in Florida, and they weren't charted anywhere. Yeah, but most skydive drop zones will have parachutes. All right. When we get to the navigation class, I'll talk more about how to navigate around jump zones. All right. Any questions on the exceptions to echo there? Oh, that's not what I want. What do I want? I want this. Okay. All right, so that's what we just talked about. We were just looking at that. This is the 700 foot. Echo starts at 700 feet. Here, echo goes all the way to the ground. Okay. One other thing, let me show you just real quick. Let me go back to Sky Vector so I can go someplace else. I wanted to show you this. I want to show you, here's Dallas. You can see it's a ring, right? You can see the ring there. You can also see this magenta ring. It says Mode C, and it also says ADS-B out ring. All right, we'll call it the Mode C veil. But you can see that where that ring is, that's where you have to be. If you're in that ring, and it usually coincides with that 60 nautical mile radius of a Bravo. That's where that Mode C veil is at. You got to have Mode C there. All right, for reasons that we discussed. If we look, I'm going to show you some other Bravos. Here's Houston. And you can see it also is circular in nature, but you got two Bravos here. You got Houston here, and you got whatever this is, Houston Hobby or Love, whatever it is down here, right? So you got two Bravos there. So you're going to have two Mode C veils. Here's one Mode C veil, and here's the other Mode C veil. So you got two Bravos right next to each other, right? And you got countless satellite airports all over the place in there, okay? All right. When you see an airspace, let me go up to Chicago where I started this flight school. So here's an example of where you've got O'Hare and you've got Midway together. So here you've got O'Hare, here you've got Midway right here, and you'll notice that Midway is kind of stuck up underneath O'Hare right there. You'll see this oftentimes where you'll see a Charlie up underneath a Bravo, or you'll see a Delta, multiple Deltas. Here's a Delta. That's my old airport here. Delta, Delta, Delta. There's Deltas all over the place. Anytime you have airspace that wedges in together, okay? So the example would be right here. Let's look at Midway here. Midway, the surface area here goes from the surface to T. What do you think that means?
To the shelf?
to the top of the, or to the overlying airport airspace on top of it. So this little piece right here, this little piece right here, that little piece right there goes from the surface up to 3,000 feet. This little piece right here goes from the surface up to 3,600 feet. Okay, so it goes up to the more restrictive airspace above it. Does that make sense? Okay, so sometimes they'll show it that way. In this case, it shows, and here it's 1,900 to the top. So here it's 1,900 to 3,600. Okay, sometimes they'll show it like this. Other times, and usually when it's a Charlie up underneath a Bravo, it's shown that way. Do you have a question?
What does the Tango even stand for, man?
Top of the overlying airspace.
Oh, top.
Yep. Okay. When it's a Delta up against a Charlie, like we have over here in San Antonio, it may be looking, it'll typically be shown a little differently, or won't be shown more specifically. So here you got Kelly Air Force Base. Here you got Kelly Air Force Base, right here, Kelly Field, right here, okay? Actually kind of goes like this, all right? And then you got San Antonio right here. So this shelf of San Antonio goes from 2,000 to 4,800, and Kelly goes from the surface to 3,200, right? Except not in here. In here, Kelly goes from the surface to 2,000. That's the more restrictive airspace on top of it. Does that make sense? It's a logical thing. Okay. So if you're in Kelly's airspace here at 3,000 feet and you cross that line, you are now in Charlie airspace. You're no longer in Kelly airspace. Okay. All right. The last thing I wanted to show you is
on this chart, you showed the Bravo actually having both the
Yes.
VSB out.
Charlie doesn't show that. You just have to know it.
Show that, but
You just have to know it. You have to know it. Yes. You have to know it. All right. Let's go over to Los Angeles here and let me show you a really wacky Bravo. All right, I'm going to show, here it is, but I'm going to show you the flip side of this so that you can see it a little bit better. There you go. That's the Bravo. You zoom in on it a little bit more. So this is this is the outer limits of the Bravo airspace right here. Right there. There's nothing circular about that at all. But there's shelves all over. It goes up to 10,000 feet. This little shelf's 2,000 to 10,000, 9,000 to 10,000, 8,000 to 10,000, 7,000 to 10,000, 4,000 to 10,000. It's a mess, right? But you'll notice that there is a Mode C veil. Right there, is that Mode C veil? Okay, all right. What if you're flying down here, you're outside the Mode C veil, but you're underneath this little section of Bravo? You still got to have Mode C. So anything in the Mode C veil or anything under the shelf of a Bravo or Charlie, you still got to have Mode C operational. Okay? So I just wanted to show you that just because typically we have these concentric circles, we don't always. Bravos, they are chopped up to accommodate whatever kind of traffic flow they need to accommodate. So I wanted to show you that. All right. Let's look at
question.
yes.
You know, we're hopefully going to have our license before long.
Yeah.
We're flying along. How the heck do you know where you're at if you don't have something like a GPS?
you have
to even follow
Come on now. GPS hadn't been around that long.
I mean, that's a tough question.
Well, no, you have your chart out.
Yeah.
You have your map, you have your chart out, and you have to have situational and locational awareness. If your instructor is teaching you how to fly on day one with a GPS, turn it off. Turn it off. Learn how to fly without a GPS.
First.
You don't need a GPS. Look out the window. Put a map in your lap, put a chart in your lap, look out the window. Okay, there's the highway, there's that big lake. That means I'm over here. There's that airport over there. There's that town over there. That's how you do it. So hey, Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic with a map, a compass, and a stopwatch. we can do it. It's possible. All right. Let's look at first of all, any questions on the exceptions? How to see the exceptions on the chart? Okay. Does everyone have a basic understanding, specifically talking to the new guys here in the room, a basic understanding of A, B, C, D, E, and G airspace? Okay. So that's your airspace. When you hear someone say airspace, that's what we're talking about. A, B, C, D, E, and G. We're talking about controlled airspace, A, B, C, D, E, and uncontrolled G. That's what we're talking about, all right? Within those airspaces, we have to maintain certain visibility to fly VFR, which when you get your license, your initial license will be VFR only, visual flight rules. You won't be able to fly in the clouds. You need an instrument rating for that. That's what gets you up into Class A airspace. And then you can fly under IFR, instrument flight rules. But we're going to be flying under VFR, visual flight rules. And to do that, the regulations say we need to have a certain amount of visibility. We have to be able to see a certain distance for it to be VFR. And we have to maintain a certain distance from clouds also. So when we talk about visibility and when we talk of VFR requirements, we think about visibility, how far can I see, and cloud distance requirements. That's what we're talking about. Visibility and cloud distance requirements. Okay? Then we also have a height of the ceiling. Where does it, in order for it to be VFR, how low can the ceiling be? I don't mean one cloud. There's one cloud out there at 300 feet. It's still VFR. But if the whole sky is covered or close to covered at 300 feet, that's too low. That's too low, right? So we have that when we talk about VFR requirements, and that's 1,000 feet. So you can remember that, 1,000 feet. The cloud deck, the ceiling, which is classified as broken or overcast. The ceiling has to be at least 1,000 feet above the ground, then it's VFR. Okay? All right. That's not what I'm getting into now. What I'm going to get into now is what the visibility needs to be and what the distance from the clouds need to be. So if we're flying on a nice VFR day, there's some clouds over here, there's some clouds over here, some clouds over here. What does the visibility need to be and how far away from those clouds do we have to stay? That's what we're going to talk about next. And it's different depending on the different airspaces that we're in. And the chart that you can get out of either the AIM or the PHAC or the FARs is going to look like this. So it lists out your A, B, C, D, E, and G. And it lists out, well, so that's the airspace, and it lists out the flight visibility. This is what the visibility has to be. And this is in statute miles. And by the way, everything in aviation, when we talk about visibility, is always in statute miles. Everything else is in nautical miles. But visibility, we look at it in statute miles. So here's the statute mile. This is what the visibility has to be. And this is how far we have to be from the clouds. And when we talk about cloud distances, we always give three numbers. How far below the cloud, how far above the cloud, and how far horizontally from the cloud. Those are the three numbers that we give. Okay? So what airspace are we in 99% of the time we fly? Echo airspace. So I want you to remember, I'm going to write it over here. You can look at it here. Right over here. I'm going to call this standard VFR, okay? Standard VFR. Okay, ceiling, 1,000 feet. So I talked about that a while ago. If the ceiling is below 1,000 feet, under normal circumstances, if the ceiling is below 1,000 feet and you are not instrument rated and you're not flying an airplane that is equipped for instrument flight, you're grounded. You can't fly. Ceiling's got to be at least 1,000 feet or higher, right off the bat. Now we'll talk about this stuff, cloud distance requirements. Visibility and cloud distance. Visibility, minimum. These are minimums. 3 statute miles. 3 statute miles, that's minimum, okay? And then your cloud distance. Cloud distance, so I'm gonna draw a cloud over here. Okay, 500 feet below it, 1,000 feet above it, 2,000 feet horizontally. Okay, so 3152, that's the way I remember it, 3152. You guys know what a Cessna 152 is? You ever heard that term?
Because of this.
Cessna 152. Cessna 152, it's like a, you've probably heard of a 172. Cessna 172. A 172 is a 4-seat Cessna. 152 is a 2-seat Cessna. Anyway, just picture 3 of them out there on the ramp. 3 152s. That's your visibility and cloud distance requirements. 3152. Okay. If you look up here at this chart, just look around at these visibility and cloud distance requirements, and most of them say 3 152s. Most everything you see up there says 3 152s. And certainly in Echo, where we're going to be flying 90% of the time, it's 3 152s, right? Down here anyway, below 10,000 feet. Okay. So can you remember 3 152s? All right, good. There are only 3 exceptions to that. So here again, I want to teach on this method of, here's your standard, 3 152s, and then here's your exceptions. Now the exceptions are here. You can memorize this if you want, or I can give you an easy way to memorize it. It's much easier, okay? It's easier for older people in the room if you know who the Bee Gees were. The Bee Gees were a group in the 70s that sang in a very high-pitched voice. It was this group of brothers. There were 3 brothers, the Bee Gees. So here's your exceptions. B, G, and high altitude. So the Bee Gees sang in a high-pitched voice. Bee Gees, high. Okay, what do I mean by high altitude? Well, what I mean is 10,000 feet. At or above 10,000 feet. At or above 10,000 feet. Okay, I'm going to say something else I haven't said yet. I'm surprised I haven't said it yet, but I'm going to say it right now. I want you to remember something. First of all, 10,000 feet. If you're at 10,000 feet, generally, there could be an exception to this, but generally, what airspace are you in? Echo, because Echo goes from 1,200 feet to 18,000 feet MSL. So if you're at 10,000 feet MSL, you're usually in Echo. You could be in Gulf, right? If you're out in West Texas, you could be in Bravo if a Bravo goes higher than Tel Aviv. But typically, you're going to be in Echo. That's where you're going to be, okay? Lots of things change at 10,000 feet. There are a lot, I want you to remember this. You don't have to know what all of them are right now, but I want you to remember that at 10,000 feet, there are a lot of rule changes that occur at 10,000 feet. Lots. Airspeed, that's for one. You know those airspeeds we talked about? Those come into play below 10,000 feet. Above 10,000 feet, you know what the speed limit is? There isn't one.
Let it go.
There isn't one. You can't break the sound barrier. That's the speed limit. You can't break the sound barrier over the continental United States. That's the speed limit, the sound barrier. Okay? But there are a lot of things that change at 10,000 feet. One of them has to do with visibilities. Okay? And what happens, so here's our standard. So 3, this is visibility. 3, 1, there's my cloud. 5, 2. 3, 1, 5, 2. Okay. Above 10,000 feet, 5 mile visibility. Okay. And with the cloud, it's 1,000, 1,001 mile. Anything above 10,000 feet. 1,000, 1,001 mile. So there's one of the exceptions right there. Remember your three 152s, and then all you got to remember is what I'm going to write over here: B, G, and above 10,000 feet. And you'll find that it'll conform to this chart right here. Okay. I'm going to put next to G here. I'm going to put inside it, maybe, or next to it in parentheses. I'm going to put during the day. This is important. G during the day. If it's G at night, if it's nighttime and you're in class G airspace, what are the visibility and cloud distance requirements? 3 152s. Doesn't change. If you're in Charlie airspace, without looking over here, just look over here. If you're in Charlie airspace, what are the visibility and cloud distance requirements? 3 152s. If you're in Echo below 10,000 feet, what are the visibility and cloud distance requirements? If you're in Delta, what are the visibility and cloud distance requirements? 3 152s, right? So the only time it's not 3 152s is if you're in Bravo, if you're in Gulf during the day, or if you're above 10,000 feet. That's the only time it's not 3 152s. All right. So above 10,000 feet, 5, 1,000, 1,000, 1 mile. I'll come to G last because G is the most difficult one, believe it or not.
One thing I heard for high altitude through a good memory was F-111.
F-111, sure, you could do that. Yep. 5. So instead of three 152s on the ramp, 5 F-111s on the ramp. 111. Yeah, you can remember that too. All right, Bravo. If you're in Bravo airspace, visibility is 3 miles. Cloud distance is simply clear of clouds. What does clear of clouds mean? Does that mean it's got to be a beautiful day and not a cloud in the sky? It means don't touch the cloud. It means you can get closer than 500 feet, but you can't get into it. You can be right on it. You can fly with your wing right, you don't have to be 2,000 feet. You can fly with your wing right against a cloud, but don't let the wingtip go into the cloud. Just remain clear of the clouds. That's Bravo, 3 miles clear of clouds. Gulf, I'm gonna qualify this a little bit, what I'm gonna put up here, but generally I want you to remember this. Gulf during the day, that's important, during the day is 1 mile clear of clouds. 1 mile clear of clouds. Okay? Now, if you can memorize, 3 152s, that just needs to roll off your tongue like your mother's name, right? You just know, you need to know that. It's 3 152s. 3 miles, 1,500, 2,000. You just need to know that, okay? And then memorize these. 3 clear of clouds, 1 clear of clouds, 5 111, 1 mile.
What does 3 152 mean again? Picture 3 aircraft sitting on the ramp, and the type of aircraft are 152s. 3 Cessna 152. A 152 looks like this, but it only has 2 seats in it. This is a 172. It's a little longer, has 4 seats. 152 is just a smaller one of these. Here you go. Here's a 152 right there. That's a picture of a 152 right there. All right. If you can remember these things, that's your standard. Here's your exceptions. You got visibility and cloud distance licked. You're done. You don't need this chart anymore. You're done. You've got it all. Okay? There's a couple of caveats, maybe things I need to talk about, and that is G. G, notice where, look at this chart right here. This is controlled airspace, and then look at all the stuff we got going on in uncontrolled. Got a lot of stuff that happens in uncontrolled airspace. Okay? So I'll talk about those. Generally speaking, when I say this, all of it refers to during the day. If it's G at night, period, it's 3 152s. But if it's G during the day, this is it, assuming, here's the assumption, and this assumption is going to happen 99% of the time that you're in G during the day. This will be the assumption. The assumption that is that you are below, at or below 1,200 feet AGL. That's it. I didn't need to make a big box like that. If you look on there, I didn't make a big. If you look on here, if you look at G there, this holds true at or below 1,200 feet AGL. What if you're above 1,200 feet AGL?
We didn't talk about that.
What is it? 152. If you're above 1,200 feet AGL, but it's daytime, the visibility is still 1 mile, but the cloud distance requirements is 152, not clear clouds. What if you're in G above 10,000 feet? Remember out in West Texas, G goes up to 14.5. What if you're in G above 10,000 feet? Now it's this, 5111. Okay, makes sense? How often does G go above 1,200 feet? I showed you the two examples where it happens.
Unless you live in Alaska.
Unless you live in Alaska or you fly around West Texas all the time, you're not going to be in those situations. So for you, from a practical standpoint, G during the day, in other words, surface to 1,200 feet or surface to 700 feet because echo drops frequently, right? G during the day is 1 mile clear of clouds. Does that make sense? All right, so here you go. That's it. Here it is, right there. That's all of visibility and cloud distance requirements right there. And this is basic VFR weather minimums right there. You gotta have at least 3 statute miles and the ceiling's gotta be at least 1,000 feet. If these conditions exist, if it's 3 miles and 1,000 feet, the conditions are VFR, and you can, as a VFR pilot, legally go get in the airplane and go fly. If the ceiling is 900 feet, you can't. If the visibility is 2 miles, you can't, right? So that's the very minimum for VFR flight right there. It's got to be at least 3 statute miles, and you got to have at least 1,000 feet, all right? Unless you're in G airspace, then you need at least 1 statute mile, and you have to keep yourself clear of clouds. Okay? All right. Any questions on that? All right. Let's talk about equipment requirements, getting in and out of the different types of airspace. Airspace. Airspace is way up there at the top, right? And you need to be instrument rated, and you need to be on an IFR flight plan. So essentially, you need a clearance from ATC, you need equipment in your airplane that allows you to fly under instrument conditions, and you need a pilot certificate that with an instrument rating. So you need to be private pilot instrument rated or commercial pilot instrument rated or ATP. Okay? Student pilot can't fly there because a student pilot cannot, by definition, have an instrument rating. Sport pilot can't fly there because a sport pilot cannot, by definition, have an instrument rating. So at a minimum, you need to be a private pilot with an instrument rating. All right, Class Bravo airspace. We need an ATC clearance. That would make sense, right? You gotta have a clearance to be in that airspace. Equipment. We need a 2-way radio. We need a transponder with altitude reporting capability. We need the radio because how else are we gonna get an ATC clearance? We need to talk to them on the radio to get the clearance to get in there. And then we need a transponder with altitude reporting capability. What's another way of saying transponder with altitude reporting capability? What's another generic way of saying that? Mode C transponder. Mode C transponder, okay. Minimum pilot certificate. Generally speaking, we say a private pilot. However, there are some Bravo airports that allow student pilot operations in there. But I have never and will never endorse a student pilot to fly in Bravo. Why? Why would you even want to? I don't want to do it as a commercial pilot, right? All right, but you could. But generally speaking, it's private. But there are some that you can go in there as a student pilot or as a sport pilot. There are a dozen or so, and they're listed in the FARs. There's about a dozen. I think it's about 12 or 13 Bravos that specifically state no student or sport pilot operations. Otherwise, it's open to them. All right, Charlie airports. Again, 2-way radio communication from a clearance. Notice here you need a clearance, here you need 2-way radio communication. I'll talk about what that means in a minute, but this is a clearance. 2-way radio communication for a Charlie means a clearance. I'll explain what that means in just a second. Equipment, well, you need a radio. If you need 2-way radio communication, you need a radio. And you need a transponder with altitude reporting capability. So what kind of transponder is that? That's a Mode C transponder, right? Or generically termed a Mode C transponder. The reason we got away from saying Mode C, although we still use it a lot, is that there are other types of transponder that do that. Mode S, which is what we have. We have Mode S's. They have altitude reporting as well. So, but if you hear Mode C, that's what they're saying. They're just saying altitude. It's like saying Xerox, right? It just means
So,
a copy machine.
If I understand what you're saying, that airplane or these airplanes out here
Yes.
don't have a mode C.
They have a Mode S, but they have altitude. The key is you need a transponder that gives altitude information. But we use the term Mode C to mean that. But it doesn't have to be Mode C. It could be Mode S. It could be any transponder that reports altitude. But we use the term Mode C just like we say, make a Xerox of that. We're just saying make a copy. It doesn't mean you have to find a Xerox machine. I can do it on my Epson over here. I can do it on whatever machine I have. But we say make a Xerox because that's just what we
So
say.
let's say you were in one of these little planes and you got into San Antonio Airspace.
Yeah.
You'd be okay. Because
Yeah,
it's
yeah, it's
reporting
fine.
your altitude.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Okay, and then as far as pilot certification requirements for Charlie, there's no specific requirement. You can be a student pilot to fly in Charlie. We endorse students to go into Charlie all the time. All right, Delta, this airport, two-way radio communication, just like a Charlie. Equipment, two-way radio. Notice it doesn't say transponder with altitude reporting capability. Why do you think that is?
You're less busy, they have maybe a visual on you.
Because they have a visual on you? Okay, well, I mean, the tower guys here could also have a visual on you. Why is it required here and here, but not here?
The tower's not always open.
No, most airports have radars.
Because deltas do not, by definition, have terminal radar. What do I mean by terminal radar? What did I say? I started this thing off by saying definition of terminal. What's it? Yeah, but radar is, but terminal means what? It's at the area. It's the area of the airport itself. So Charlies and Bravos must, by definition, they have radar. In other words, there are physical facilities out. You go out there, you'll see this dish spinning around, sending out signals. Or you'll see a ball, you'll see something, you'll see a radar out there where it's actually sending out signals and picking up aircraft. Okay, so if the airport you're flying into has terminal radar, then you must have a transponder with altitude reporting capability so that they can see you, give you a transponder code, you put it in your transponder and they guide you in. Okay? Deltas, by definition, do not have radar. Therefore, why do you have to have even a transponder? Not only do you not have to have a transponder with altitude reporting, you don't even have to have a transponder in the airplane. Because there's no piece of equipment on this airport anywhere that can see you. So why would I require you to have a piece of equipment that I can't even look at? Does that make sense? So deltas, you don't need a transponder. Not only do you not need a Mode C, you can take the whole thing out and throw it in the garbage and go fly. You don't need a transponder at all to fly into a Delta airport. Okay. Now, if you don't have a transponder with Mode C capability, can you fly under the shelf of a Charlie? No. Can you fly under the shelf of a Bravo? No. Can you fly over the top of a Charlie? No, you can't. Can you fly into here? You sure can. Yes, you can. So you only need Mode C when you're flying in, through, or around, or over terminal radar service areas or airports that have terminal radar. Bravos and Charlies. They're the only ones that can see you. Okay? Make sense? All right, so we need two-way radio communications established and maintained. Two-way radio, obviously you can be a student pilot. All you guys are student pilots. You fly out of here all the time. All right, and then we get into Class Echo. Class Echo is that part of controlled airspace where we might be taking advantage of ATC's ability to control us and help us out, or we might not, right? So do we need a clearance from ATC to be flying there? Of course not. Do we need any special equipment? Nope. We don't even have to have a radio. We don't have to have a transponder. We don't have to have a radio. We don't have to have any of that stuff. What about pilot certificate? We don't even have to have a light. We can be flying ultralight without a pilot's license. That has no radio, no transponder, no nothing.
You can be flying around with a butt chute like he flies around here. No radio, no nothing. Perfectly legal. Okay? All right, and then you get into G, and obviously you don't need anything to fly in G. Nothing at all to fly down there. All right? All right, let's drop back here and look at these entry requirements here real quick because this is important. I'll talk about them quickly and then we'll take a break. What does a clearance mean? Well, you can't, there are certain airspaces you cannot be in without being cleared by air traffic control, by ATC to be in these airspaces. Bravo goes without saying, right? That's where the big, busy, I mean, how many of you want to go just fly into Bravo airspace for the fun of it? You do?
Yeah.
Do it in the middle of the night. Do it like 3 o'clock in the morning and call them first. Let them know you're coming. I don't want to go in Bravo. I really don't want to go in Bravo. But if you're going to go into Bravo, you need a clearance and you need to hear ATC say these words. You are cleared. Just like when we take off here, what do they say? Cleared to take off runway 17 or whatever, 13, whatever. They say cleared to take off. They say cleared to land. You get a specific, you hear the word cleared to do something. When you go into Bravo airspace, before you enter that airspace, you need to hear cleared to enter the Bravo airspace. You got to hear that. That is your clearance. All right. Getting into a Charlie or Delta, you don't have to hear those words cleared to. How many of you have ever heard coming in from the East practice area, you call the tower, you say, New Braunfels Tower, 448 Romeo Alpha is 10 to the east, landing with echo, and then come back and say, 448 Romeo Alpha, cleared to enter the Delta, report 4 miles. You ever hear that? Never. What do they say? 448 Romeo, report 4 miles. That's all they say. All we need for either a Charlie or a Delta is two-way radio communications prior to entry. They didn't write the rest of it on here, but what it really says in longhand is two-way radio communications established and maintained prior to entry. So you need to add that established and maintained. Established, what does communication established mean? Here's what it means, very simply. You call them by name and they call you by name. So if I say, hey, Sebastian, and he says, hey, who's calling me? We have not established two-way radio communications. If I say, hey, Sebastian, he doesn't say anything, we have not established two-way radio. If I say, hey, Sebastian, he says, hey, Dave, now we've established two-way radio communication. That's what it means to establish. So if I call the tower out there 10 miles east and I say, Tower 448 Romeo Alpha 10 east, landing with echo, and they call back and say, 448 Romeo Alpha, stand by. They're busy doing something. 448 Romeo Alpha, stand by. Have we established two-way radio communication?
Yes.
Yes, I can enter the airspace. Even if they don't call me back, I can just fly right on into the airspace. Okay, that's establishing radio communication. If they call and say 448 Romeo Alpha, or if they say aircraft calling from the east, stand by. Have I established radio communications? No, because they said aircraft calling from the east. They didn't call me Dave. They said, hey, you over there, whoever you are, stand by. That's not communication establishment. Communication establishment is 448 Romeo Alpha, stand by. Now they've called me by name. They could also say 448 Romeo Alpha, stand by and remain clear of the Delta. Can I enter the Delta? No, because now they gave me a directive not to come in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so establishing radio communication is two-way. I call you by New Braunfels Tower, they call me by my IN number. If they don't use my IN number, we haven't established communication. They got to say my IN number. Okay. Maintain. What does it mean to maintain two-way radio communication? Do I just keep talking? Hey, how's it going? Hey, what's up? How's your mom? What are you having for dinner? What did you eat last night? You got to just keep doing that?
You have to monitor the frequency.
You stay on the frequency. That's what it means to maintain. Don't change frequencies and don't turn the volume down. Keep your volume up, keep the frequency, keep the radio set to that frequency. So establishing is calling by name, maintaining is be on the correct frequency and don't change that frequency. Make sense? All right, let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get going here. So the two basic types of airspace are what? Controlled and uncontrolled. Within controlled and uncontrolled, we have 6 classes. What are they? And Gulf. Okay. And of those 6, which ones, how many are controlled versus uncontrolled? What's controlled, what's uncontrolled?
Echo Golf or uncontrolled.
No, Gulf.
Oh,
Gulf is the only one that's uncontrolled. And we can think about that one being uncontrolled. Logically, we can, the way to remember this is because of what?
radar.
Because it's so low to the ground. It's just, and so then that also helps us remember that it's from the ground and it stays very, very low, with that one couple of crazy exceptions out in West Texas, New Mexico, and in Alaska. Okay. All right. Within both uncontrolled and controlled airspace, within those airspaces, we designate other things that we call special use airspace or other airspace. So here's examples of special use airspace: prohibited, restricted, warning, military, MOAs, alerts, controlled firing areas. So I'll show you these. I'll show you what these look like on the chart and whatnot, and how they're charted and whatnot, and what they mean. But I want you to understand that, like, if we see an area that's prohibited airspace, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in a vacuum, in a silo. It means it exists and takes up part of either Gulf or Echo or maybe even Alpha. You know, it's over here, but it is inside one of those other A, B, C, D, E, or G. It's just there. But we give it a special use name because it's used for a specific purpose. Okay, that's why we call it special use airspace. So prohibited airspace, just being educated individuals, what do you think that means?
Prohibited.
Don't go there. It's prohibited. You can't fly in that airspace. That's prohibited airspace. Here's what it looks like on the chart. So here's an example. This is up north of us. It looks like this. It's plotted like this. And it says, if you don't see the word prohibited, you'll see this blue, might be a circle, might be another shape, but you'll see the blue with these kind of hashing around it. And it'll have a number, and it'll start with P. That means it's prohibited. It's a prohibited airspace. And it happens to be numbered P, in this case, it's P49. Prohibited 49. Okay? And the lateral limits of prohibited airspace is it's right there. You can see it. In this case, it's 1, 2, 3, probably about 4 miles. Looks like it's about 4 miles in diameter. Each one of these little tick marks is a nautical mile. So it's probably about 4 miles, nautical miles in diameter. Okay? But what are its vertical limits? Where does it start and how high does it go? Well, it doesn't say that on the chart, does it? I mean, it doesn't say it on this part of the chart, but every chart, and with all most of these airspace I'm getting ready to show you, you can find the lateral limits are plotted like there's your lateral limits, but the vertical limits are not. So when you go to your chart, we'll do this when we go to the cross-country phase, navigation phase. You go to the chart, every chart will have this portion on it right here, and it's on this portion right here where you would find P49. It will tell you its vertical limits, all that kind of, it'll give you further information on it right there. So that's how you would get that information. I'm not going to go over that with you today because I do it in the navigation class, but I want you to know it's available. Okay, that's a prohibited area. This one happens to be George Bush's ranch, just outside of Waco. So, and it goes up to 2,000 feet, AGL. So you can't, or yeah, I think it's, I'd have to look. I think it's AGL. You can't fly below that. You can fly over the top of it and got to stay out of it. All right, that's a prohibited area. Restricted area, now notice how prohibited area looks on the chart. It's that blue with a hash around it. Restricted area looks very similar. It's very similar, okay, and as far as the blue with the hash, but it has a number starting with R, so that's a restricted, okay? So restricted area, you cannot fly in that airspace without permission. You have to have permission from the controlling agency, ATC, whatever agency is controlling that airspace. You have to have permission to be in it. If it's active, or if it's not all restricted airspace is active all the time. Generally speaking, prohibited airspace is pretty much continuous use. Restricted air, but again, it would say that on the inside cover there that I showed you on the chart, you'd find that there. If it wasn't, it would list it right there. This same thing, it'll list its operational times. It could say, you know, Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, or by NOTAM or something like that, but whatever. It'll tell you when it's active. It'll tell you who the controlling agency is. And if it's active, you cannot be in it without permission. You get that permission from the controlling agency. You find the controlling agency on the chart. Okay? If it's not active, you can fly right through it. It's not active. But you better make sure it's not active before you fly through it. Okay? Prohibited area, just don't go through it. At any time, just don't go through it. All right. Warning areas. Warning areas you find along the coast of the United States. It's not really, well, it shows it out here, warning 147C, but it actually starts 3 miles out, I'm not sure if it's statute or nautical miles. In this case, it might be statute miles, but it's 3 miles out from the coast. That's where warning areas start. They start 3 miles out from the coast. And then you see here, it's actually listed. Well, actually here, you can see it's listed here too. This one here, 22.8 alpha, actually starts then 3 miles out from the coast. And then here's a different one, 147C. Here's a different one, 147D. Those are warning areas. So they start 3 miles out. Military operations areas. So again, this, as an example, let's talk about this as an example. This warning area here, what airspace is it in? It's in Gulf, Echo, Alpha. It's in all of them. It's in all of them. It's just, unless you look at the warning area and it says something other than that, but you'll see that it could be in any or all of them, right? Okay, if I look back at this right here, I know this goes up to 2,000 feet. So this prohibited area exists in Gulf. So does Gulf exist here at the ground? Yeah, it actually does. But it's also a prohibited area, so you can't be there. That's Gulf you can't fly in. Does Echo exist here? Yeah, it exists above 1,200 feet, but you can't be there because it's a prohibited area. So you understand what I mean by, we still have our A, B, C, D, E, and G, but then we have this special use that kind of gets stuck in there and we use it for other reasons, other things. Okay, military operations areas. These you see everywhere around here in Texas. My Lord, they are everywhere. This is a military, they call this military town, right? San Antonio, the military town or something like that. So here's the San Antonio sectional. And everywhere you see this magenta with the hash, you see it all over the place here, just everywhere. All of those are MOAs. Those are military operations areas. They are everywhere in this. They're everywhere in the United States. You can't fly anywhere in the United States without seeing MOAs. They're all over the place. Okay. What does that mean for you from a practical standpoint? What does that mean for you? Well, it means that you could have high-speed military traffic, things happening inside there. So here's us right here. Here's an MOA right here. This is the Randolph Auxiliary MOA. Here's Randolph 1 Alpha MOA, 1 Bravo MOA, and it goes out this way and down, and they're all over the place. Okay. The lateral limits, you can see it. You can see them. The vertical limits, how do you know where they start and where they stop and when they're active? How would you get that information? On that tab of the chart right there. You get it right there. Yeah, that's how you know when they're active, when they're operational, where they start, where they stop. Okay. Now, if we were restricted in flying in MOAs, we'd never be able to fly anywhere. You just wouldn't be able to get anywhere because they're all over the place. So there is no restriction against flying in an MOA, even if it's active. You can fly right into it. There's nothing illegal about doing that, but you want to be very vigilant. It's nice to know if it's active. If it's active, that's not going to keep me from going in it, but it's certainly going to heighten my senses of awareness, and I'm really going to be watching closer for traffic. I'm really going to be looking for traffic a lot because I know it's active.
I think another really interesting thing is if you like take the 638, for example, just southeast of our airport.
Oh, here? Yeah.
You can look in the sectional and say like, oh, look, it has 3,500 MSLs where it cuts off. So
Right.
it's kind of interesting info that you just want to fly over it.
Right. Yes. Yeah, you can get where it starts and where it stops and normal active times. Sometimes it'll give you days of the week and times on those days. And then it might also say by NOTAM, which means they could open it up at any other time if they want to, but there would be a NOTAM, a notice to airmen that it's open, right? Okay, so those are MOAs, military operations areas. You can fly in them, whether they're active or not. There's no prohibition against you flying in them. Just if they're active, just don't stop your collision avoidance. Don't be head in the cockpit. Be head outside looking for traffic. Okay, all right. Alert areas. Alert areas are types of MOAs. So here's one down here, but they alert you of student pilot, high density student pilot operations. Okay, so alert areas are published areas where they're saying, hey, listen, there's students, a lot of students flying around out here. Be especially aware of what's going on around you. That's an alert area. They're just alerting you, hey, you can fly in here, but understand your chances of collision go up a few points, perhaps, or something along those lines. So that's an alert area. Here's a concentrated student jet training going on over here. Concentrated student jet training over here. So this is 632 Delta, 632 Echo. There's different areas where there's a lot of student pilot operations going on. So again, you can see, we could look at the legend or the chart to see where it starts and stops, but this area right here, I don't know, but some of it might exist in Golf, some of it might exist in Echo, some of it could exist in Alpha. It's here somewhere. So it cuts in and out or goes through different airspaces. Okay, you with me? With me so far? All right, the last one, as far, excuse me, as far as special use area, is controlled firing areas. Okay, these are areas where they conduct missile firing and they shoot things down and stuff. And here's the fun part about this I like to talk about a lot is these aren't charted, so you don't know where this is happening. So they're shooting things out of the sky and you don't know where that's happening. That's comforting, isn't it? So what they do is they have spotters. They have people watching for traffic, and if they see you wandering into that space where they're shooting drones and stuff down, they get on the radio. Hopefully the radios aren't jammed and everything's working okay. And they say, stop firing because we got a Remos flying through the area. And then they wait till you leave the area and then they start shooting things down again. But you don't know where that's at because they don't let us know where they do that kind of top secret stuff. Okay. Remos builds drones for the military, by the way, too. They look just like our airplanes. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Just joking. All right. That's special use airspace. Let's talk about other airspace. Again, other airspace is you find within A, B, C, D, E, and G. It's just we're giving these classifications so that we can define them a little bit more deeply. All right. Local area advisory. You really don't have to worry about this too much. You'll only find these in Alaska. Only place you'll find LAAs is in Alaska. Those are airports. Those are found at airports that do not have operating control towers, but that do have flight service stations located on the field. Okay, so you probably have heard the term flight service before. Most of you, flight service, okay? And there's this propensity for students, new students, to have confusion between ATC and flight service. Flight service is not ATC. ATC is not flight service. What is ATC? That's the only thing I've been talking about today so far. What is ATC? Air traffic control. What's their job? Okay, their job in a nutshell is to keep airplanes from running into each other. That's their job in a nutshell. That's what they do. They control aircraft flow. Okay, they don't want people running into each other. Essentially, that's kind of, if you boil it down, that's kind of the big picture, right? They do other things. Flight service or flight service stations, they are meteorologists. They're the guys that tell you what the weather is. That's what flight service does. Next week, when we do the meteorology thing, Joseph Hill, if he doesn't work for, but he could work for FSS because he's a meteorologist. That's what they do. They tell you weather. So when you do flight planning, you get briefings for flight plans and stuff, and you want to check the weather, you're not going to call ATC. You're going to call flight service. They're going to give you a weather briefing. They're going to tell you the weather along your route is this or that, or You could expect good VFR conditions, or you might have some IFR conditions. That's what flight service does. So in Alaska, there are airports that have flight service stations physically located at some airports. Wherever that exists and there is no tower, there's an LAA. That's all that is. All right. Military training routes. Not to be confused with military operations areas like this. Military training routes, they're a little more difficult to see on the chart, but they're these, you can barely see it here. See this light gray line? It's a very light, faint gray line with a number there. It says IR 148, goes this way. Okay. I don't know if there's any more in this picture. I don't think there are, but when we get to the navigation week and everybody has a chart out, I'll show these to you a little more clearly. Okay. But these are all over the place, especially around here. They are everywhere around here, okay? Military training routes, MTRs. The important thing to recognize with military training routes, there's two important things to recognize. First of all, recognize that it exists right there, okay? And you want to look at two things. You want to look at what it starts with. It's either going to start with an IR or a VR, and then it's going to have a number behind it. That number is either going to be 3 digits or it's going to be 4 digits. That's the key to these. Does it have 3 digits or does it have 4 digits? Okay, first of all, who's flying around on these things right here? High-speed military jets. Zip, 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 all over the place, right? All right. IR means instrument route. VR means visual route. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means if it's a visual route, the guy flying that jet at 250 knots or 300 knots or whatever he's doing is supposed to be looking outside, but I wouldn't count on it. If it's an IR route, you can absolutely be assured he's not looking outside. He's looking inside. So he's not looking for you, okay? So that's one thing, IR or VR. The next thing, the more important thing I think is the digits here, 3 digits or 4 digits. I want you to think about an altitude. That tells us, the 3 digits or 4 digits tells us what altitude, what's the floor or what's the ceiling. That's what it's telling us. That number, the floor or the ceiling, is 1,500 feet AGL, 1,500 feet AGL. Okay? Logically, and 3 digits or 4 digits are saying that in one case they stay below 1,500 feet, in the other case they might be above 1,500 feet. Okay? 3 digits or 4 digits. I'm going to let you try and logic your way into this, and then I'm going to tell you it's backwards. It's backwards from the logic you're going to come up with. All right, if it's 3 digits, do you think that means that they are below 1,500 feet or that they're above 1,500 feet? It's above. Because logically you'd think below because it's a smaller number, so it's backwards from what you would logically think. That's why I said it that way. I want you to think it's backwards. If it's 4 digits, they're below 1,500 feet. If it's 3 digits, they're above 1,500 feet. Okay? It's backwards. You'd think, they could just change that so that it made sense, but they don't. All right, that's military training routes. TFRs. Okay, boy, we get these all the time now. Temporary flight restrictions, TFRs. These pop up all over the place. There's currently a TFR, a long TFR that stretches from Fredericksburg to Canyon Lake. And it's because they're doing the search and rescue along the Guadalupe, along that route. So there's a giant, it's been up since the floods. So it's temporary because it's not going to be up forever, but it's a temporary flight restriction. You can't fly in that space because they got a lot of helicopter activity and search and rescue activity going along on this corridor, and it's a published TFR. Right there is what it looks like.
Sure.
It's just a TFR, temporary flight restriction, right? And if you click on that, it'll tell you the altitudes and all that kind of stuff. But that's an area that you can't fly in right now. Those come up, they pop up as needed. They pop up when they're needed, okay? The search and rescue is a good example of it. Generally speaking, when we talk about TFRs, we're going to talk about 2 kinds of TFRs. Outside of this is a search and rescue TFR. Outside of this, the typical TFRs that you get, I call them anyway, stadium TFRs, or I call them VIP TFRs or presidential TFRs. So those are the two that you're going to encounter most of the time. Then you need to kind of have some feel for. Stadium TFRs, can I erase this? Anybody need this up here anymore? Stadium TFRs exist anywhere. It doesn't have to be a stadium. We call them stadium TFRs, but anywhere you're going to have a congregation of people of 30,000 or more. If you're going to have 30,000 or more people congregating, then there's going to be a stadium TFR in effect. Okay? So the way to kind of think about this is a bunch of threes. Think about a bunch of threes with stadium TFRs. It's a bunch of threes. Okay? So stadium, you need 30,000 people or more. Okay? The TFR itself is going to be a 3 nautical mile radius. So think of the tuna can, 3 nautical mile radius. It's going to be 3,000 feet AGL. And the way to remember it's going to be AGL is how could you remember, just how could you know logically this is going to be 3,000 feet AGL and not MSL?
The stadium's on the ground.
Huh?
The stadium is on the ground.
Yeah, and what if you're in Denver?
The stadium's on the ground.
Can't be 3,000 MSL. It's going to go up to 8,000 MSL, right? So it's going to be 3,000 feet AGL. Okay. All right. So 30,000 people, 3 nautical mile radius, 3,000 feet AGL. That's your TFR. Whether you see it physically put into ForeFlight, that's your TFR, and it's going to be there. Okay. When does it start? When does it start? Stop. 1 hour before the scheduled start to 1 hour after the ending. That's a stadium TFR. Okay? So if, you know, one of these universities is having a football game, guess what? There's a stadium TFR. It goes into effect an hour before the start, and it's in effect until an hour after the finish. 3 nautical mile radius, 3,000 feet up in the air. Okay? You can fly over the top of it. What you can't do is fly over the top and then just circle. You can't loiter up there. You can't do that. You can fly over the top, but you can't sit up there and loiter over the top. That's a TFR. That's a temporary flight restriction. That's the stadium TFR. Then you have VIP or presidential TFRs. These are big. So the president was here last week. Wherever the president is, wherever he's at, he's got a presidential TFR around him. Like it emanates from where he's at, and the whole thing, like when he moves this way, the whole thing moves with him. Wherever he moves, the whole TFR moves around him. And here's what that TFR looks like. Think of, there's 2 concentric circles. And the president is right there in the center. Okay? These circles go from the surface up to 18,000 feet. So they go from the surface up to Class A airspace. Okay? All right, so if you're in Class A airspace, you could fly over the top of this. The reason being, when you're in Class A airspace, you're on an IFR flight plan, you're in contact with ATC, they know who you are, where you're going, what your purpose is, they know everything about it. So they're directing you through that. Okay. This inner circle right here, this is a 10 nautical mile radius. This outer circle, this is a 30 nautical mile radius. So this is as big as Bravo airspace. That's how big this is. This is as big as Bravo. So 60 miles around he's in the center, 60-mile tube from the surface up to 18,000 feet, wherever the president goes. Okay? This section inside here, radiating out 10 nautical miles, this is absolute, don't go there. If you fly there, you are in serious trouble. Serious trouble. Not a little bit of trouble, a lot of trouble. Don't go there.
Do they have, considering president?
Yeah.
Do they have like
They have
F-16?
they have
something
cover.
like that, sir?
They have cover, yep. Yeah, if the target starts moving that direction and they're not talking to somebody, you'll have
Okay.
military aircraft on you really quick.
Just remember.
Yeah, really quick. Yep. All right. Anything out here, anything from this 10 mile to 30 mile ring, you can be flying in here, but you need to be talking to ATC, not flight service, ATC, and you need to be on a discrete squawk code. All right, what do I mean by a squawk code? In our airplanes, we have a transponder. Everybody know what a transponder is now? Okay. Transponders, with the transponder, it's accessible from the instrument panel there. You can put a 4-digit number in that transponder. That's called a squawk code. When you're squawking a specific code, whatever you have in your transponder. That's what the radar is picking up. The radar sends a signal. When the signal comes back, your squawk code comes back. If you're not talking to ATC, you're just out flying around, and you're just a VFR guy flying around, what do we put our transponders to? 1200. So we have 1200 in there. And then when ATC sees it, they just know, yeah, there's a guy just out flying around. It's just VFR, just flying around, because we live in the United States. We can do that kind of stuff, right? We can just go fly around. It's like you get in your car and drive, you get in your airplane, go fly. If you're going to be in this area between here and here, you need a discrete code. So you need to be in contact with ATC. They need to have given you a specific code to put in your transponder. It's no longer reading 1200, it's reading 3565 or whatever number they give you. Now your little blip is tagged up. And they're watching you, and you're on the radio with them, you're talking to them, they're giving you direct, you're under their control in that case. So you can be in this outer ring if you're under the control of ATC. You're either on an IFR flight plan, which automatically means you're under ATC control and you have a discrete squawk code, or you can be flying VFR in a situation where they have you with a discrete squawk code. You've probably done that before if you've ever done flight following, VFR flight following. They give you a squawk code. If you're on VFR flight following, if you're talking to ATC and you have a discrete code and ATC directs you into a TFR, you're okay. You're okay. Okay? Generally speaking, in these situations, however, let's say you're taking off from an airport that's right here, the president's right there. You can get permission to get out of there. You need to get a hold of ATC before you take off. You need to have your squawk code already in and your radio frequency that you're going to tune to right away as soon as you take off. And generally, you're going to get clearance that way. You're not going to get cleared to go that way. You're not going to get cleared to go that way. You're going to get cleared straight line, most direct line out of that space. That's what's going to happen. But you're not necessarily grounded. Now, if you're at an airport inside here, you're SOL till the president leaves.
Grounded.
You're grounded till the president leaves. You're not getting out. Okay? All right, that's TFRs, presidential versus stadium TFRs, okay? Versus, natural disaster type TFRs. You'll get those. All right, published VFR routes. That's another type of. Or excuse me, parachute. Did I skip parachute routes? No, I'm on parachute routes. Parachute routes are parachute jump areas. So we have one over by us right here. So we're right here. And right here we have Fentress Air Park. So it has a little parachute jump area. I'll talk more about this when we do navigation. But just real quickly, I want to say if you're flying anywhere within 5 miles or so of a parachute jump area, you need to be very aware of what's going on at that jump area, okay? 2 things you need to be doing. You need to be, first of all, if they have a published frequency, you had better be listening to that frequency. You had better have a radio tuned into that frequency, okay? Secondly, think about the direction of the wind. Where's the wind coming from? The wind, if it's coming from here, if the wind is coming in this direction, say out of the south, and I'm skydiving, I got a couple 1,200 jumps. If I'm skydiving, when I was skydiving, I don't skydive anymore. If the wind's coming down here from the south, when I get out of the airplane, I don't want to get out over here Because as soon as I open my parachute, guess where I'm going? That way, right? I want to get out over here so that I drift back towards the airport. So think of where the wind is coming from. And if you have to fly, if you're flying from here and you're going this direction, and the wind's coming out of the south, don't fly that route, fly this route. Make sense? Okay. Go to the downwind side, don't go to the upwind side. All right. So those are parachute jump areas. Be listening on the frequency. If you're listening on the frequency, early, don't just, oh, I'm there and turn on the frequency. You might have missed it already. Listen all the time. Listen early. You'll hear things like, jumpers away in 5 minutes at or below 14,000 feet, blah, 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 whatever airport is. They'll say jumpers away in 2 minutes, and then they'll say, caution, jumpers away 14,000 feet below Fentress Airport. So you know, all right, they're out. They're in free fall. Where do they open? Where do canopies typically start opening?
4,000.
Who said that? Oh, you're a jumper. Well, you know. They can open anywhere from 5,000 to 2,000 feet. Those tandem jumps, they open around 5,000 feet or so. If you're young and bulletproof like me, you open at 2,000 feet. Okay? My point is, you're not going to see them in free fall. So if you're flying around 6,000, 7,000 feet, you're not going to see any shoots. You might just see ding, ding, out of the corner of your eye. Hopefully it doesn't hit the plane as they go zooming by you, right? So be aware of jump areas. Be very aware of them. All right. Next one is published VFR routes. This is the backside of the Dallas terminal area chart, TAC chart. On the front side of the chart, let me show you real quick with the Houston sectional.
I got it.
Yeah, well, I can use this one. I got Houston here. Anywhere there's a Bravo airport, well, first of all, let me show you this. These are all the sectional located. Everywhere you see the little kind of rectangular space here, that's a sectional. In some of these sectionals, you see, or in some areas, you see these little magenta squares. See those little magenta squares? Everywhere you see a little magenta square, that's where a Bravo airport exists. And everywhere there's a Bravo airport, the airspace gets really complicated and tricky. And therefore, everywhere there's a Bravo airport, they will also publish something called a terminal area chart. So this is a sectional chart, but here is the Houston area, and around the Houston Bravo, you see this white line right here? See that white line? That white line is the outline of where there is a larger scale TAC chart published for this, okay? Called a terminal area chart. So it takes the sectional and it doubles its scale. It blows it up twice so that everything is more detailed. You can see much greater detail. On the flip side, on the back side of that TAC chart is this chart. So this is the back side of the TAC that's published for Dallas. And it gives us published VFR routes. So because we're VFR pilots, if we're flying around Bravo airspace, what they do is they say, here are published routes that you can fly that keep you out of the Bravo, and they use very defined ground reference, things that you can see, so that you don't need a GPS. You can get your chart and you look out the window. There's that tower, there's the road, there's the river. Let me stay over this and at or below these altitudes, and I'm not going to be in Bravo's airspace. I don't have to talk to anybody. I do have to have mode C transponder. I mean, ADS be out, but I don't have to talk to anybody. That's what published VFR routes are. You'll find them on the back of the TAC charts for Bravo airports. The thing I'll say is if you're flying in any airspace or in any areas of the country where a Bravo exists, you're going to be flying anywhere near a Bravo, I would highly recommend getting a TAC chart, terminal area chart for that area. Highly, highly recommend it. Okay, terminal radar service area. Let's look at these. Terminal radar service area. So this is, so Houston's right over here. So this is up Louisiana and areas. This is, let me go to the, it's hard to see on this. Let me go back to, me go back to Sky Vector where it's a little easier to see. I can zoom in a little bit better on that. Oh, so that's so this was the example of the VFR fly route for Los Angeles. This is the back of the TAC chart, right there. All right, if we go to World VFR right there, we come over here. Here's those two I was looking at right there. So these are called TRSAs, Terminal Radar Service Areas. Let me just zoom in on one of them right there. All right, so first off, I want you to recognize, what is this showing me here?
Delta.
That's a delta. That's a delta. But I've got these charcoal color rings, and you can see a surface area and then these outer shelf areas like we talked about with Charlies or Bravos, right? So what gives here? This is a weird thing that people don't understand much, but I'm gonna try and make it as simple as possible. I'm gonna say this, I want you to remember this. TRSA, Terminal Radar Service Area, this is an example of other airspace. It doesn't legally exist, okay? It doesn't legally exist. In other words, you don't have to abide by the things that you don't have to avail yourself, that's a better way to say it. You don't have to avail yourself of the services that are offered in this type of airspace. Okay, so what is a terminal radar service area? Well, what do you think? Break down the definition of things we've been talking about. Terminal radar service area. What do you think that means?
Like Bravo, they'd be monitoring.
You have terminal radar service. So just like a Charlie and just like a Bravo, Charlies and Bravos both have terminal radar service, right? There's an area in which they cover and they do terminal radar service. And because they have terminal radar service, what piece of equipment do you have to have in both a Charlie and a Bravo that you don't have to have in a Delta? You have to have a Mode C transponder. You don't have to have a Mode C transponder in a Delta, right? All right, what kind of airspace is this? All right, that's also a TRSA. What that means is that this particular Delta airport has terminal radar service. This is an oddball Delta. This is a Delta that acts like a Charlie or a Bravo. Does that make sense? Okay, but it's a Delta. The only legal airspace here is Delta. Do you have to have a transponder with Mode C? No. Even though they have terminal radar, you don't have to avail yourself of that service. It's essentially a holdover. It's a throwback to airspace we used to have back before it changed in the mid-90s. We changed in the mid-90s. We got on board with ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. All of the rules, or some, not all of them, some of the rules changed in what airspace, what were the different types of airspace, what were the requirements. These airports were not busy enough to classify themselves as a Charlie, but they were busy enough to be a Delta, so they became Delta, but they had radar service. So we didn't just dismantle the radar service, we kept it, but we don't have to use it. As pilots, we don't have to use it. Okay, that's the legal standpoint. From a practical standpoint, when you fly in and out of a TRSA, you're going to do it just like you would any other terminal radar service area. You will use approach control, you'll use clearance delivery, you'll use departure. Why not? Why wouldn't you? They got radar. Why not avail yourself of it? Right? So from a practical standpoint, you're going to treat this just like it's a Charlie. From a legal standpoint, you only have to treat it like it's a Delta, because legally that's all it is. It's a Delta. Is that confusing enough?
Sure. Is
Pretty-
that Jacksboro? Is that the name of that airport? Jacksboro?
Beaumont. This
Oh.
Jacksboro Regional. It might be Jacksboro. I don't know.
And being that it's in blue, it's
Right here. Well, yeah, Jacksboro, unless there's another there. But yeah, it looks like that's it. Yeah. Okay. That's a TRSA, Terminal Radar Service Area. Those can be confusing. And they're all over the place. There's another one right here next to it. Lake Charles Regional. That's another TRSA. So you can clearly see the the Delta. Here's the Delta, all right? So if you're flying right over the top here at 3,000 feet, what airspace are you in? You're in Echo. There's other airspace there which happens to be the Tersa, but the only legal airspace you're in is Echo. You're in Echo airspace. Okay?
Wait a minute, now there's a 70 surface.
That's the Tersa.
Oh, that's.
This is the Tersa.
Okay.
So here the Tersa starts from the surface and goes up to 7,000 feet. But when you're at the surface, are you in the Tersa? Yes, but that's not legal airspace. You're really in from a legal standpoint, you're in the Delta. Okay? All right, so that other chart I had up there with equipment requirements and pilot certification requirements and all that, you notice Tersa wasn't listed anywhere because you're in this is a Delta. Okay? All right, any questions on that? Let's go to, what was the last one? I think I had one more. There's one more to go over.
Air defensive.
Oh, ADAS. Okay, well, here, I can stay where I was at for the ADAS. So the ADAS, you're going to find the ADAS, right here. Right there's the ADAS. See it right there, Air Defense Identification Zone. You'll see it along the border of the United States. Here it is here as well. Right along here. That's going to be your ADAS, so Air Defense Identification Zone. That's the point where if an aircraft crosses that, comes into the U.S. across that line, the U.S. better know who you are before you cross that line. You need to, or else, we're going to take defensive measures. So that's the Air Defense Identification Zone. You need to identify yourself before you cross that zone. We don't have to worry about that flying inside here. Okay. Okay. That is, we got 5 minutes left. That is pretty much airspace right there. Okay, so let's do some question and answer. Let's do some evaluation here of what we learned. Okay, I'm going to pick on you now. You ready for this? I'm going to start picking on people. Okay.
I'm gonna get out of here.
Yeah, I'm going to pick on you. All right, well, what is the vertical and lateral limitations of alpha airspace?
18,000 to 60,000.
Okay, and what are the lateral limitations? The whole United States. Okay. All right, Echo.
1,200 AGL, 18,000 MSL, and then the United States.
Okay. Charlie. And you can read your notes, that's fine.
Charlie is surface to 1,200 to the first shelf, up to 4,000 AGO.
Okay, what about lateral?
4 to 5 nautical miles radius.
And the outer ring?
I'm not sure.
10 nautical miles. 10 nautical mile radius, so 20 mile diameter. Okay. All right, good. All right. I just thought about something that I didn't talk about. Let me use the rest of this time to talk about it. We talked extensively about about Mode C transponder, right? Everybody in this room knows what a transponder is now? Everybody in this room know what a Mode C transponder is? Okay, good. ADSB came out in 2020, January 1st of 2020. That's when it became a law that in certain types of airspace, you need to have ADSB out, okay? The airspace in which you need ADSB out, you just need to remember anywhere you need transponder, Mode C transponder, anywhere you need a Mode C transponder, you need ADSB out, okay? Where do we need, so I can just, if you hear Mode C transponder, think ADSB out. If you think ADSB out is required, Mode C transponder is required. They go, it's like a glove. They go hand in hand, okay? Where is a Mode C transponder required?
Bravo, Charlie.
Okay, be more specific. That is true, but be more specific. So if you're within the airspace of Bravo or Charlie, that's true.
Or above.
Or, yep, or above or below it. Up to what altitude? If you're above Charlie, up to what altitude must you have Mode C transponder?
All the way to 18.
Well, no, specifically it's at 10,000 feet. Okay, 10,000 feet. Well, why do you think you only have, what if you're at 10,001? What if you're 11,000? Don't you think they'd still want to know where you are? Okay, remember I said before that there's a lot of things that change above 10,000 feet? Guess what else happens at 10,000 feet? Mode C transponder. Everywhere. ADSB out. Everywhere. When you get above 10,000 feet, remember a lot of things change. Visibility, cloud distance requirements change, speed limits change, equipment requirements change. Mode C transponder. Okay? So anything above 10,000 feet, you got to have a Mode C transponder. Okay?
The same rule applies for Bravos, right? Flying over it.
But Bravos typically go up to where? 10,000 feet.
Okay.
So you have it above it. But there are some Bravos. There's one I want to say, might be Atlanta. It might be Atlanta that goes up. No, Atlanta goes to 12,000. There's one that I know that goes like 8,500 feet. So in that example, above it, you'd have to have it. If you're at 9,000, you'd have to have Mode C above it. Yeah, there's one, I can't, there may be more than that, but there's one that I remember seeing.
Atlanta all would be the craziest.
Atlanta goes, I think that one goes to 12.5 if I remember correctly.
What is that again, the ADSB?
ADSB, Automated Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. Automated Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. So it's a combination of a ground-based system and a satellite-based system. Okay, next week. All right, but any questions, first of all, before I go to next week? That I tried to kind of quiz you as I went.
The one at noon, how long is that one going to be?
I don't know. I don't know how long he's planning on talking. I would imagine, knowing Joseph, a couple hours. There's a lot to talk about in that thing. All right, next week is a fun one. It's E6B. So if you have a kit, if you have the kit, this is the E6B. We're going to learn how to use this. If you have the pilot kit from us or whatever, if you don't have one of these, you need to get one of these. We're going to be using these. I would suggest, it will help you greatly, if each one of these comes with a little instruction book, I would suggest you at least go through and learn some basic stuff. But I'm going to show you, we're going to be showing you how to use this so that in the following week, which is navigation, where we have to use this, we know how to use it. All right? See you next week.